Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. My name's Austin Gibson, and in 2020 I found myself caught in one of the strangest, most twisted nights of my life. While camping out near the edge of Crater Lake National Park, I'd like to tell you this was just a roughing-it trip, but the truth is, I decided to try out a new RV I got off my cousin Derek, who's known for selling almost new gear that barely holds together. The RV was old, dented, and probably in worse shape than my beat-up station wagon, but hey, a deal's a deal. I'd been running from my city life, or at least I was trying to convince myself I needed a break from it. A week with nothing but trees, my lopsided camp stove, and a folding chair sounded great on paper. In real life, it was lonely as all hell. The first couple of days I busied myself with hiking and cooking sad attempts at camp food, which mostly involved canned chili and things I could stab with a stick over the fire. But by the third day, I was beginning to realize why folks don't typically spend much time out here alone. Now, Crater Lake is a beautiful place, but it's isolated. You don't have the crowds of Yosemite or Yellowstone. It's quieter. I spent a lot of time listening to every little crackle and crunch in the trees, figuring it was either a bear or maybe a ranger who'd gotten a whiff of my chili experiments and was ready to fine me for culinary crimes. Then, on the fourth evening, I heard the sound. It was sharp, sudden, like metal scraping against metal. The RV had been creaking and rattling since I got it, but this noise was different. I froze. As I strained to listen, it stopped. I laughed at myself, figured I'd probably just hit my paranoia peak and turned back to the fire. I threw in another log, settled back, and let the quiet wrap around me. An hour later I heard it again, but this time it was closer. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, hoping it was maybe just another camper who'd taken a wrong turn. Silence. The fire crackled as I scanned the tree line. There was nothing but shadows. I was about to chalk it up to the forest playing tricks on me when my eye caught a glint of something metallic. The gleam was low to the ground, moving slowly, as if someone was crawling just beyond the reach of the firelight. My throat went dry. I held my breath, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise as the figure came into view. It was a man, crawling on his hands and knees. His face was hidden in the dark. He was holding something, dragging it along the ground with a scraping sound that made my teeth clench. I took a step back toward the RV, my hand fumbling for the handle, but the man stopped, raised his head and grinned. "Evening," he rasped, his voice raw, like he hadn't used it in years. He stood up slowly, unfurling like some creature shaking off the night. His face came into the light, and I could see he had wild, unkempt hair, a scar running across his jaw, and a pair of glasses that looked like they'd been pieced together from scraps of wire. He wore a dark trench coat, its pockets sagging with heavy, uneven bulges. "Lost," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my hand trembling on the RV handle. He tilted his head, that grin stretching wider. "No, not lost, just looking for company." I forced a laugh. "Well, I'm kind of in the middle of my own thing here." "You've got a pretty nice setup," he nodded toward the RV, then at the fire. "Real cozy." "Yeah, I like it," I said, trying to sound casual, though every instinct was screaming for me to get inside, lock the door, and drive the hell out of there. The man's gaze shifted down to the fire, then back to me. "Mind if I join you?" His tone wasn't so much a question as a challenge. He took a step closer, and I could see his hands were streaked with grime. My brain scrambled for an excuse, anything to make him leave. "Actually, I was just about to turn in," I said, swallowing. "Long day, you know." The man's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, sure," he muttered. "Long days. Lots of those around here." He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with this fixed look, like he was sizing up a piece of meat. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the fire. He dropped something from his coat, a small metal object that clinked against the rocks. In the glow of the firelight, I recognized it. A surgical scalpel. The blade glinted as it caught the light. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I yanked open the RV door and scrambled inside, slamming it shut and locking it. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, but when I looked, no signal. The RV was dark, and I could barely see out the windows. The man was still outside, pacing around, muttering to himself. Then I heard it, the scraping. He was dragging something along the side of the RV, scratching marks into the metal. I whispered a stream of curses under my breath, trying to think. There was a small hunting knife in the drawer by the stove. Not much, but it was something. I grabbed it, gripping it tightly as I crept toward the window. The scraping stopped. Then, a tap at the window. He was there, peering in, his face twisted in that same grin. He leaned close, pressing his nose to the glass, fogging it with his breath. "You can't stay in there forever, Austin," he whispered. I froze. How did he know my name? I don't remember making the decision. 1 second I was frozen in fear. The next I was lunging for the RV's driver's seat, jamming the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it into gear and tore out of there without a second thought. I could see him in the side mirror, standing by the fire, watching me drive off. His face was a pale smear in the rearview as he disappeared into the dark. I thought that was it. That I'd made it. But 10 minutes later, as I was driving down the winding forest road, I caught a glimpse of headlights in the mirror. My stomach sank. I sped up, but the car behind me matched my speed, tailing me close enough that I could see the outline of the driver's face. It was him. Come on, I muttered, slamming my foot on the gas. The RV rattled and groaned, barely holding together as I pushed it faster down the road. Ahead, the road split in 2 directions. I didn't have time to think. I veered right, hoping it would throw him off. But his headlights followed, the glare growing closer, brighter. The RV shuddered, the wheel bucking in my hands as I struggled to keep control. The road narrowed, trees closing in on either side, branches scraping against the sides like claws. Then, just as the road took a sharp curve, his car swerved, slamming into the side of the RV with a force that sent me crashing against the door. The RV spun, tires skidding on the gravel, and I fought to keep it from flipping as it lurched to a stop. Silence. My head was ringing, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I looked up, expecting him to be right there, waiting. But his car had stopped a few feet behind, headlights off, just a dark shadow on the road. For a long, tense moment, neither of us moved. Then his door opened and he stepped out, silhouetted in the moonlight. He was holding something in his hand, the glint of metal catching the light, a machete. Long and dull, nicked along the edge. I didn't have time to think. I flung open the RV door and bolted into the trees, ducking low as I ran, not daring to look back. Branches whipped at my face, the ground uneven and slippery. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I pushed myself faster, lungs burning, legs screaming. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree, my fingers digging into the rough bark. Ahead, the trees began to thin, the ground sloping down toward the lake. I risked a glance back and saw him, his silhouette moving between the trees, machete held low. "Austin," he called, his voice echoing through the woods. "Come on out. Let's finish this." I didn't answer. Slipping down the slope toward the water, I could see the faint outline of an old boathouse near the shore, half collapsed and covered in moss. Desperate, I ducked inside, pressing myself against the damp wood, heart hammering as I tried to catch my breath. The footsteps stopped. I strained to listen, every nerve on edge, waiting for him to come crashing in. But there was only silence. Then, a slow creak. The sound of wood groaning as he stepped onto the dock outside. "Thought you'd be tougher," he said, his voice drifting through the walls. "All that running, just for me to find you here, like a rat in a trap." I held my breath, gripping the hunting knife so tight it hurt. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and I saw the glint of his machete, the edge slicing through the faint moonlight as he stepped into the boathouse. He took a step forward, and I could see his face in the dim light, twisted with a sick kind of glee. He raised the machete, taking his time, savoring the moment. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I lunged forward, slamming the knife into his side. He let out a grunt, stumbling back, eyes wide with shock. I twisted the blade, pushing deeper, feeling the resistance as he staggered, dropping the machete with a clatter. He slumped to the ground, his hands clutching the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. I stumbled back, gasping, heart racing as I watched him struggle, his breath rattling in his chest. For a long moment he just lay there, eyes glazed, his hand twitching as he reached for the machete. But his strength was gone. With one last shuddering breath, he went still. The light faded from his eyes. I staggered out of the boathouse, the night air cold against my skin, my mind numb as I stumbled back toward the RV. I climbed up the slope, barely aware of the blood smeared on my clothes, my hands shaking as I reached the RV. I climbed in, feeling the coolness of the wheel beneath my fingers as I gripped it tight, steadying myself. I turned the ignition. After a moment's hesitation, the engine roared to life. Relief flooded through me, my mind still racing but anchored by the familiar hum of the engine as I drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness. I tried to process what had just happened, his face, that twisted grin, the way he'd known my name. All of it circled in my mind like some surreal nightmare. But the wound I'd left on him, the blood, it was real. Tangible proof of everything. I was almost out of the forest when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Parked by the side of the road was a dark SUV, its windows tinted, a thick layer of dust caked on the back. Emblazoned on the rear bumper was an old, nearly faded decal, Crater Lake Volunteer Search and Rescue. As I drove past, I glanced back and noticed something else, a pile of clothes. Clothes and personal items scattered in the dirt nearby. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But as I kept driving, I pieced it together. He must have once been part of the search and rescue team. Maybe someone who'd ventured out to help people, until something twisted him. Maybe it was isolation, or maybe he'd just seen too much. Whatever it was, it had left him hunting for company, preying on anyone who got too close to his part of the woods. I finally reached the edge of the forest, the lights of a distant highway flickering like salvation on the horizon. The RV rattled over the gravel road, every bump a reminder that I was still alive. I pushed onward, away from the darkness of Crater Lake, away from the boathouse, the blood-stained ground, and the silence that hung thick and heavy over those trees. As I merged onto the highway, I thought about making a report, about telling someone what had happened, but then I remembered his face. That smile he'd worn when he first approached me, like he'd already anticipated every move I'd make. He knew the forest, knew the ins and outs of every trail and hidden spot. By the time anyone went looking, there'd be nothing left to find. Just an empty boathouse, a pile of clothes, and an unsettling silence that would keep his secrets buried in the dark. The RV rolled on, and with each mile the forest receded, swallowed by distance and the night. My name is Zachary Coleman, and this story is from a year that feels like a lifetime ago. I was born and raised in the small town of Wellesley, Massachusetts. Not much happens here, which is why what I'm about to tell you is even more bizarre. It started innocuously enough. I was fresh out of college back in my hometown, working a dead-end job at the local hardware store. Not exactly the life I'd envisioned, but hey, it paid the bills. My girlfriend, Lacey, had just moved in with me. We were both trying to save up for something better, but at least we had each other. One evening, my buddy Owen called. "Zachary, you up for a camping trip this weekend? Just the guys, like old times." Owen always had a knack for pulling me out of my funk. "Sure, why not?" I replied, figuring a weekend in the woods might clear my head. Friday rolled around, and we packed up Owen's beat-up truck with all the essentials: tents, sleeping bags, food, and a decent stash of beer. It was me, Owen, Kyle, and Benny. We headed out to a spot in the Berkshires, a place we'd camped a few times before. It was remote, quiet, and far from the hassles of daily life. We got there just before dusk. set up camp, and lit a fire. The night was filled with laughter and stories. It was like we were kids again, with no responsibilities, no worries. Around midnight, I decided to hit the sack. The others were still up, talking and joking. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, their voices faded into the background, mingling with the sounds of the forest. I woke up to silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I checked my watch, 3 a.m. I sat up and noticed that Owen, Kyle, and Benny were all fast asleep. Stepping out of the tent to stretch my legs and take a leak, I saw the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the campsite. As I stood there, I heard a rustling noise in the trees. Probably a deer or some other animal, I thought. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It was tall, hunched over, and moving with an unsettling grace. My first thought was that it was a bear, but something about its shape was all wrong. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The figure stopped, turned toward me, and then vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I finished up and went back to the tent, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning I told the guys what I'd seen. Owen laughed it off. "Man, you probably had one too many beers. Nothing out here but us and the wildlife." The others agreed, and we went about our day, hiking and exploring the area, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting around the fire again, talking about old times, when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman, but there was something primal about it, something that chilled me to the bone. "What the hell was that?" Kyle asked, his face pale. Benny, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's Bigfoot, or worse, Kyle's ex-girlfriend." We laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. We decided to check it out, grabbing flashlights and heading in the direction of the scream. The woods were dense, and the beams of our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. After about 10 minutes, we came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. "Oh my God," Benny whispered. "What could have done this?" Kyle asked. "Mountain lion, maybe?" Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We heard another rustle in the trees, and all our flashlights swung toward the sound. The figure was back. Standing at the edge of the clearing, it was taller than I'd realized, easily 7 feet, with long, matted hair and glowing eyes that reflected the light from our flashlights. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted back toward the campsite. The creature let out a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting and wide-eyed. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Agreed," Owen said. "Let's pack up and leave, now." We scrambled to gather our things, tossing them haphazardly into the truck. The forest around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Just as we were about to get in the truck, Benny screamed. We turned to see the creature standing at the edge of the campsite, its eyes locked onto us. Without thinking, I grabbed the hatchet from my pack and hurled it at the creature. It let out a roar and retreated into the woods. "Drive!" I yelled. Owen didn't need to be told twice. We sped down the dirt road, the truck bouncing over the rough terrain. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the windshield. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. Finding a diner that was still open, we stumbled inside, disheveled and shaken. The waitress, an older woman with a kind face, looked at us with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring us coffee. "Something like that," I muttered. We told her a sanitized version of what had happened, just enough to explain why we were so rattled. She listened, nodding occasionally. "You know, there are old legends about these woods," she said. "Stories of creatures that aren't quite human. Most folks dismiss them as just that, stories, but you never know." We spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, too afraid to sleep. The next morning we drove back to Wellesley in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about that night again. Not really. It was like an unspoken pact, a way to keep the fear at bay. Lacey noticed the change in me right away. "Zachary, what happened out there?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a weird trip, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. None of us were. Owen moved to another state a few months later, saying he needed a fresh start. Kyle and Benny drifted away, their laughter and jokes now tinged with an edge of unease. As for me, I stayed in Wellesley, but I never went camping again. I sold my gear, got a new job, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scream, and I wonder what it was we saw out there in the woods. Life went on, as it does, but the shadows of that night never entirely left me. Years later, Owen called me out of the blue. "Zachary, we need to talk." We met at a bar halfway between our towns. He looked older, more worn. We ordered beers and sat in silence for a while. "I can't stop thinking about it," Owen finally said. "That night, I've tried to move on, but it's always there, like a shadow." "Same here," I admitted. As the years passed, the memory faded but never disappeared, and maybe it never will. I grew old watching my children grow up and start families of their own. I told them stories about my youth, but I never mentioned that night in the Burkers. Then one evening, my son Max, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset, and he turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip you went on years ago? The one you never talk about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, I remember." Max nodded. "I've been doing some research. There are stories about those woods, stories that go back centuries. People talk about seeing things, hearing screams. I think you saw something real, something that shouldn't be there." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of old fears. Maybe. But there's no point in dwelling on it. We survived, and that's what matters. Max nodded, but I could see the curiosity and determination in his eyes. "I just wanted you to know that I believe you, Dad. Whatever it was, you're not alone." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Maybe the past would never fully let go, but I had my family, and that was enough. Life is full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will. But I've learned to live with the shadows, to find light in the moments that matter. And that's enough for me. My name is Zachary Coleman, and this story is from a year that feels like a lifetime ago. I was born and raised in the small town of Wellesley, Massachusetts. Not much happens here, which is why what I'm about to tell you is even more bizarre. It started innocuously enough. I was fresh out of college, back in my hometown, working a dead-end job at the local hardware store. Not exactly the life I'd envisioned, but hey, it paid the bills. My girlfriend, Lacey, had just moved in with me. We were both trying to save up for something better, but at least we had each other. One evening, my buddy Owen called. "Zachary, you up for a camping trip this weekend? Just the guys, like old times." Owen always had a knack for pulling me out of my funk. "Sure, why not?" I replied, figuring a weekend in the woods might clear my head. Friday rolled around and we packed up Owen's beat-up truck with all the essentials, tents, sleeping bags, food, and a decent stash of beer. It was me, Owen, Kyle, and Benny. We headed out to a spot in the Berkshires, a place we'd camped a few times before. It was remote, quiet, and far from the hassles of daily life. We got there just before dusk, set up camp, and lit a fire. The night was filled with laughter and stories. It was like we were kids again, with no responsibilities, no worries. Around midnight, I decided to hit the sack. The others were still up, talking and joking. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, their voices faded into the background, mingling with the sounds of the forest. I woke up to silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I checked my watch. 3 a.m. I sat up and noticed that Owen, Kyle, and Benny were all fast asleep. Stepping out of the tent to stretch my legs and take a leak, I saw the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the campsite. As I stood there, I heard a rustling noise in the trees, probably a deer or some other animal, I thought. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It was tall, hunched over and moving with an unsettling grace. My first thought was that it was a bear, but something about its shape was all wrong. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The figure stopped, turned toward me, and then vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I finished up and went back to the tent, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning I told the guys what I'd seen. Owen laughed it off. "Man, you probably had one too many beers. Nothing out here but us and the wildlife." The others agreed, and we went about our day, hiking and exploring the area. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting around the fire again, talking about old times, when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman, but there was something primal about it, something that chilled me to the bone. "What the hell was that?" Kyle asked, his face pale. Benny, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's Bigfoot, or worse, Kyle's ex-girlfriend." We laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. We decided to check it out, grabbing flashlights and heading in the direction of the scream. The woods were dense, and the beams of our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. After about 10 minutes, we came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. "Oh my God," Benny whispered. "What could have done this?" Kyle asked. "Mountain lion, maybe?" Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We heard another rustle in the trees, and all our flashlights swung toward the sound. The figure was back. Standing at the edge of the clearing, it was taller than I'd realized, easily 7 feet, with long matted hair and glowing eyes that reflected the light from our flashlights. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted back toward the campsite. The creature let out a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting and wide-eyed. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Agreed," Owen said. "Let's pack up and leave. Now." We scrambled to gather our things, tossing them haphazardly into the truck. The forest around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Just as we were about to get in the truck, Benny screamed. We turned to see the creature standing at the edge of the campsite, its eyes locked onto us. Without thinking, I grabbed the hatchet from my pack and hurled it at the creature. It let out a roar and retreated into the woods. "Drive!" I yelled. Owen didn't need to be told twice. We sped down the dirt road, the truck bouncing over the rough terrain. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the windshield. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. Finding a diner that was still open, we stumbled inside, disheveled and shaken. The waitress, an older woman with a kind face, looked at us with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring us coffee. "Something like that," I muttered. We told her a sanitized version of what had happened, just enough to explain why we were so rattled. She listened, nodding occasionally. "You know, there are old legends about these woods," she said. "Stories of creatures that aren't quite human. Most folks dismiss them as just that, stories. But you never know." We spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, too afraid to sleep. The next morning we drove back to Wellesley in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about that night again. Not really. It was like an unspoken pact, a way to keep the fear at bay. Lacey noticed the change in me right away. "Zachary, what happened out there?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a weird trip. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. None of us were. Owen moved to another state a few months later, saying he needed a fresh start. Kyle and Benny drifted away, their laughter and jokes now tinged with an edge of unease. As for me, I stayed in Wellesley, but I never went camping again. I sold my gear, got a new job, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scream, and I wonder what it was we saw out there in the woods. Life went on as it does, but the shadows of that night never entirely left me. Years later, Owen called me out of the blue. "Zachary, we need to talk." We met at a bar halfway between our towns. He looked older, more worn. We ordered beers and sat in silence for a while. "I can't stop thinking about it," Owen finally said. "That night. I've tried to move on, but it's always there, like a shadow." "Same here," I admitted. As the years passed, the memory faded but never disappeared, and maybe it never will. I grew old watching my children grow up and start families of their own. I told them stories about my youth, but I never mentioned that night in the Burkers. Then, one evening, my son Max, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset, and he turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip you went on years ago? The one you never talk about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, I remember." Max nodded. "I've been doing some research. There are stories about those woods, stories that go back centuries. People talk about seeing things, hearing screams. I think you saw something real, something that shouldn't be there." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of old fears. "Maybe. But there's no point in dwelling on it. We survived, and that's what matters." Max nodded, but I could see the curiosity and determination in his eyes. "I just wanted you to know that I believe you, Dad. Whatever it was, you're not alone." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Maybe the past would never fully let go, but I had my family, and that was enough. Life is full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will. But I've learned to live with the shadows, to find light in the moments that matter. And that's enough for me. My name's Ronald Lopez, and this happened back in 1997 in the Arkansas Ozarks, deep in the woods near Devil's Den. I'd been tracking and hunting in these parts for years, the kind of rugged wilderness only a few folks ever venture into. I'm Cherokee, and these woods feel like part of me. I know every twist in the trails, every stream and hollow, or at least I thought I did until that day. I had my cousin Nate with me, a wiry guy with a sarcastic streak that seemed never-ending. He'd say stuff like, "You ever get tired of pretending you're some forest sage?" To which I'd tell him he looked like a feral raccoon and that he should be grateful for my sage guidance. He'd been itching to come out here, mostly just to heckle me, I figured. That morning we packed light, rifles, a couple of knives, some jerky, and the basics for a day out scouting the denser parts of the forest where most hunters didn't bother to go. By midday, we'd gone deeper than usual. The silence out there was different. Usually, there's always some rustling, birds, even the hum of mosquitoes, but today the air felt like it was holding its breath. Nate made a joke about it, something about nature getting stage fright, but I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the eerie quiet you sometimes get in the thick of the woods. We kept going, the trees growing denser and the undergrowth thicker, when we stumbled across something unusual, a freshly beaten path. It looked odd, too clean-cut and recent, as if it had been trampled repeatedly by something big. I stopped, eyeing the trail, but Nate was already marching forward, too curious to wait. He called back, "Hey, Ronald, you think Bigfoot finally left us a calling card?" I laughed, but something felt off. The trail was wide, and in the packed dirt I spotted prints, large, almost human-like, but elongated, like whatever made them had spread out twisted toes. "It's not Bigfoot," I muttered, scanning the area for more signs. The trail led us deeper into the forest, and as we moved, the silence grew oppressive, as though the trees themselves were listening. The air smelled wrong, too, a thick, rotten stench that clawed at the back of my throat. I was about to suggest we turn back when we saw something sprawled across the path. It was a deer, what was left of it anyway. The thing had been mauled, guts half spilled and torn open with a force that no predator around here could manage. I'm no stranger to death or the way the forest claims its own, but this was different. It looked like it had been ripped apart in anger. Maybe a cougar, Nate suggested, though his voice didn't carry its usual mock confidence. I shook my head. Cougars don't do this. They take their kill up a tree, eat their fill. This is messy. But Nate shrugged, brushing off the unease, and against my better judgment we pushed on. The deeper we got, the more we found bits of fur, broken branches, all signs of something big and angry cutting through the forest. Then we heard it. A wet, dragging sound, like something enormous was hauling itself through the underbrush. Nate froze, eyes wide, and I could see the fear creeping into his usually cocky face. The sound grew louder, a sickening, slithery scrape that made my skin crawl. Maybe we should. Nate started, but his words were cut short when it came into view. The thing was massive, hunched and covered in patches of matted, filthy fur that clung to its skin in clumps. Its body was twisted, like a bear that had learned to walk upright but didn't quite know how. Its limbs were long and uneven, one arm dangling lower than the other, fingers splayed wide and crooked like gnarled roots. And its head, it reminded me of a boar's, but with a blunt, almost human-like snout and jagged rows of teeth that jutted out, dripping something dark and thick. Nate cursed under his breath, but we didn't have time to react. The thing spotted us, and with a guttural huff it charged, barreling through the brush with a speed that didn't match its awkward frame. I raised my rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the trees, but it barely slowed. Nate scrambled back, his gun slipping from his grip, and I watched as he stumbled, struggling to get to his feet. The thing was on him in seconds, slashing and tearing with a ferocity I'd never seen. I shouted, emptying my rifle, the shots ricocheting off its hide like stones against steel. Nate was screaming, thrashing under its weight, and for a split second, our eyes met. His look wasn't one of fear or pain, but of resignation, a kind of acknowledgement that this was it. And then, just like that, his scream stopped, replaced by the sickening sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen, rifle empty, mind blank. When the creature finally turned toward me, I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me, but I forced myself to move, breaking into a desperate run. My legs felt like lead, every step pounding as the thing's footsteps crashed behind me, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I tore through the trees, my only focus on putting as much distance as possible between me and that thing. Branches slapped against my face, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible, navigating the dense woods by instinct alone. Somehow I managed to reach a small ravine. I leaped down, hoping the drop would buy me time. My ankle twisted painfully on impact, but I kept moving, scrambling through the rocky terrain until I could no longer hear its footsteps. I don't know if it gave up, or if it simply decided I wasn't worth the chase anymore. But either way, the silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the chase itself. I didn't stop running until I reached a ranger station, practically collapsing at the feet of the ranger on duty. My words tumbled out in fragments and he stared at me like I was out of my mind. I don't blame him. If someone had told me this story, I wouldn't have believed them either. The rangers went out to investigate the next day. They found Nate, or rather, pieces of him, scattered and torn, just like that deer we'd seen. I overheard one of them mumbling something about some kind of feral hog gone rogue, but I knew that wasn't it. Whatever was out there wasn't anything they'd find in a field guide. I returned to the spot alone a few weeks later, not out of some morbid curiosity, but because I needed to understand. I found the path again, but there was no sign of the creature. The woods felt normal, almost welcoming, as if it had never happened. But when I found a twisted branch where Nate had dropped his rifle, the memory of that thing surged back like a wave. I don't go that deep into the woods anymore, and I don't talk about what happened with anyone. All I know is that something ancient and territorial lurks in those hills. Something that doesn't care for human intrusion. Some people think monsters live in our imagination, but I know better. In the end, I can't tell you what that creature was or where it came from, only that it was out there, beyond reason and understanding, protecting. My name's Terry Mason, and back in 1997, I took my first trip to the deep swamps of Louisiana alone. I was 27, young and foolish enough to believe that being Choctaw meant I could handle anything the woods threw at me. Guess I thought I was a cross between Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. My friends back in Oklahoma always said I was just asking for trouble, heading out to unknown places like that. Anyway, I made my way out to the Bayou Teche, planning to explore some of the lesser-traveled marshlands. I rented a small boat from a local, a wiry old man named Clyde, who grunted more than he spoke, and set off around dawn. The water was dark, heavy with vegetation, and all sorts of strange critters lurked just below the surface. Figured I'd see a couple of gators, maybe get lucky and spot some rare birds. My grand adventure, right? For hours, everything was quiet. Just the soft splash of the oars, the occasional ripple as fish broke the surface, and the haunting calls of egrets echoing through the dense green. I was even beginning to enjoy it, to feel a strange kind of peace that you only find when you're completely cut off from the world. And then I saw it. Just a flash at first, something moving along the edge of the swamp. Looked like a deer, maybe, but it was bigger, with long limbs that didn't quite fit together right. It paused in the underbrush, watching me with something between curiosity and hunger. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the light. The thing's head twisted to the side, almost as if it was trying to decide what to do with me. I shook my head, telling myself it was just some weird deer. I pushed on, figuring if I ignored it, it'd go away. You see something strange out in the wild, it's usually best to leave it alone. But soon enough, the feeling came back, like eyes on my back, pressing down with that weight that tells you you're not alone. I started paddling faster, watching the water ripple in my wake, feeling sweat trickling down my spine despite the cool morning air. And then it started again. Rustling from the trees lining the bank, something moving in time with my boat. Every time I sped up, it did too, matching my pace without even breaking a twig. I slowed, stopped even, holding my breath as the silence around me grew thicker. Nothing. Just the soft hum of insects and distant bird calls. Then, just as I was convincing myself it was all in my head, the thing appeared again. Closer this time. It crept out of the trees and I finally got a good look. Imagine a deer, but stretched out, distorted, like something half-finished. Its limbs were too long, its body too lean, skin hanging tight against a skeletal frame. And that head, twisted, almost too human, with a mouth full of sharp, broken teeth. I forced a laugh, telling myself some messed-up Louisiana swamp critter had wandered too far from its hole. But it didn't just stand there this time. It started walking toward me, stepping down the muddy bank, those bony legs bending at all the wrong angles. I'll admit I panicked. I grabbed the oars and started paddling like a madman, muscles burning, heart pounding. But the thing didn't stay behind. It waded into the water, its head just above the surface, moving with a quiet, terrifying speed. I cursed under my breath, frantically paddling, but it kept coming, weaving through the water like it belonged there, not a single splash as it glided along. And just when I thought I might actually outrun it, my boat rocked. Hard. I glanced back, heart in my throat, and saw it, gripping the edge of the boat with one of those skeletal hands, broken fingers wrapped tight around the wood. My mind went blank. I remember grabbing the only thing within reach, an old flashlight, and swinging it wildly, connecting with a dull thud. The creature let go, retreating just a bit, but I could see it was more annoyed than hurt, like a predator sizing up its prey, deciding how much effort it wanted to put into this kill. Then I did something I still don't fully understand. Instead of paddling away, I stood up in that wobbly little boat and started shouting at it, my voice cracking, filled with some primal rage and fear I didn't even know I had. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe I thought that by acting crazier than it, I'd scare it off. To my shock, it backed off, retreating a few feet, watching me with those empty eyes, if you could call them that. But it wasn't done. No, it wasn't about to let me go that easy. It slunk back into the water, vanishing beneath the murky surface. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I dropped back into the boat, paddling with every ounce of strength left in me, aiming for the shore, for any piece of solid land that might give me a fighting chance. But it followed. I could see ripples just behind the boat, the thing weaving through the water with a terrifying elegance, circling like a shark sizing up its next meal. Finally my boat scraped against the muddy shore, and I scrambled out, boots sinking into the thick sludge. I stumbled, nearly falling flat on my face, but I managed to keep moving, crashing through the underbrush. That's when I realized it was toying with me. I'd get a few feet ahead, only to hear it moving alongside, pacing me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. It wasn't about catching me anymore. It was about the hunt, the thrill of wearing me down. And then I heard it, something that stopped me cold. A low, rattling sound like bones scraping against each other. I turned slowly, just in time to see the creature emerging from the shadows, its twisted body crouched low, mouth open in a sick grin. I took a step back, heart hammering, mind racing through every terrible scenario. With nothing left to lose, I ran. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. But I didn't stop, didn't dare glance back. And just when I thought I might have put some distance between us, I stumbled into a clearing. And there it was, waiting for me. This time, it didn't hesitate. It lunged, and I barely managed to dodge, feeling the air shift as one of those broken claws grazed past me. I swung my flashlight again, but it was like hitting a stone wall. The creature snarled, backing off just enough to let me get to my feet. I ran, taking every twist and turn, diving through trees, pushing through underbrush, desperate to shake it. But it kept coming, relentless, a shadow that wouldn't let me go. Finally, I broke through the trees and saw Clyde's shack in the distance. I screamed, waving my arms, hoping the old man would hear. I stumbled onto his porch, pounding on the door, shouting his name. The door creaked open, and Clyde's eyes widened as he took in my wild appearance. "Did it follow you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, like he already knew the answer. I glanced back, but the creature was gone. Just the swamp, silent and still, as if it had swallowed the nightmare whole. Clyde pulled me inside, locking the door with a trembling hand, muttering something under his breath in a language I didn't understand. I sat there, shivering, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline while Clyde moved around the room, gathering strange herbs, muttering old words. He turned to me, face grim, and told me about the old stories. About the swamp's hidden creatures. Things that had been here long before people arrived. When he finished, he glanced out the window, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "It's still out there," he said, voice barely a whisper. "We call it the Bone Walker, a spirit of the swamp, hunting any soul foolish enough to come too close. I left Louisiana that night, catching the first ride I could find out of town. They say the swamp keeps its secrets. But I know one thing for sure. Some secrets are better left buried in the mud, and for every soul that wanders too deep, the Bone Walker waits. Patient as death itself, hungry for the next fool who dares to step into its domain." My name is Gabriel Allen, and I remember this happened back in 2012, deep in the Ouachita National Forest, Arkansas. I had planned this RV camping trip to break out of my routine as a tax consultant. I didn't exactly have the wildest schedule, and every so often the quiet drove me up the wall. So I packed up, got my RV loaded with snacks, fishing gear, and a couple of mystery novels and set off, aiming to unwind, eat some terrible campfire meals, and maybe catch a fish or two if I was lucky. The Ouachita stretches for miles, and you can drive for hours without seeing another soul, perfect for a guy who needs some isolation therapy. I found a spot nestled between tall, unbothered pines and parked. It was far enough off any main trail to make it feel like I was in my own little slice of wilderness heaven, yet close enough that if I twisted my ankle or ran out of supplies, it wouldn't be a total disaster. The first night was peaceful, just the sound of crickets and the occasional rustling. I even caught myself chuckling at how silly it was to be so jittery at the slightest forest sound. By the next afternoon, I'd already fallen into the calm of the place. After grilling up some truly unfortunate hamburgers, I decided to take a hike to stretch my legs and maybe scout for a better fishing spot along the creek. I'd barely made it 100 yards from my RV when I noticed something strange. A dead rabbit hanging from a tree just a few feet off the trail. Now, I'm no stranger to odd sights in the woods, but this was different. The rabbit's body was stiff, dangling by what looked like a homemade snare, some kind of rough twine twisted around its neck. Maybe someone local had been out trapping and just left it there by mistake, I thought, trying to brush off the odd feeling settling in my gut. But as I walked back toward my RV, I noticed two more animals, small birds this time, hung from branches in a similar way, like little macabre decorations. The strange thing was, there wasn't a hint of decay. They couldn't have been hanging there for more than a few hours. Suddenly, my peaceful camping trip felt less like a retreat, and more like I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't meant to see. I picked up my pace back to the RV, thinking it might be best to move spots, maybe a little closer to a trailhead. But as soon as I got back to my site, I saw something else. Footprints. Bare human footprints. They trailed around my RV, leading up to the door and looping back around toward the tree line. My first thought was maybe some prankster kids were trying to mess with me, but the prints were large, much too big for kids, and they were fresh. I could still see the damp impressions in the forest floor. The quiet was different now. It felt like the whole forest had gone dead silent, and every little crackle of a branch felt amplified. I climbed into the RV, closed the door and locked it, for all the good it would do. I sat down, trying to decide what to do next. My phone had no reception out here, so calling for help wasn't an option. I figured I'd sleep with one eye open, maybe head back out in the morning. The night was tense. I heard what I thought were branches snapping nearby, footsteps shuffling around my RV. Every time I turned off the interior lights to look outside, I saw nothing, just darkness pressing against the windows. Around midnight, I heard a soft scraping sound against the side of the RV, like someone dragging their hand across the metal. I grabbed the closest thing I had to a weapon, a fishing knife, and sat there waiting, barely breathing. The scraping sound moved, circling the RV, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped, and everything went quiet. By dawn I was exhausted, running on nothing but stale coffee and nerves. I stepped outside, hoping daylight might make me feel less paranoid, but I quickly noticed something that sent a chill up my spine. The footprints were back, fresh, leading directly to my RV door and back to the tree line, where they disappeared into the brush. I was done. I decided right then to pack up and head out. I was only halfway through loading everything back into the RV when I heard it, a low, strained voice from somewhere in the trees. Leaving already? I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might actually burst. I scanned the trees but saw no one. I yelled out something unintelligible, something about this not being funny and calling the police, but the voice chuckled. Mocking. Cold. "Oh, I'm just getting started," it said, echoing through the trees like it was coming from everywhere at once. The voice was rough, a growl underneath, not like anything I'd ever heard from a human. But it had to be a person. I told myself that over and over. I finished packing as fast as I could, throwing things haphazardly into the RV, and climbed into the driver's seat, ready to get the hell out of there. But when I turned the key, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried again. Nothing. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel, and in a panic I jumped out, thinking maybe I could fix whatever was wrong if I opened up the hood. When I did, my stomach dropped. All the wiring was shredded. It looked like someone had taken a knife to every crucial part of the engine. In a blind panic, I decided my only option was to make a break for it on foot. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with water and snacks, and took off toward the nearest trailhead I'd seen when I drove in. It was supposed to be about 3 miles out, reachable if I kept up a good pace. I'd barely made it 10 minutes into my walk when I heard the footsteps behind me. Soft at first, like someone trying to match my steps, I quickened my pace. The footsteps followed. When I broke into a run, the footsteps behind me sped up too, and that's when I finally turned around. There he was, a hulking figure, close enough now that I could make out the twisted grin on his face, teeth bared in a half-smile that didn't reach his cold, sunken eyes. His hair was long, tangled, hanging over his shoulders like a matted mane, and he wore clothes so ragged they barely clung to his body. The worst part was his hands. Long, clawed fingers that he flexed like he was itching to use them. I kept running, my mind racing through every mistake I'd made on this trip, every stupid decision that had led me here. I could hear him gaining on me, the heavy sound of his boots pounding the ground. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered reading that people who live out here sometimes go a little feral. Whatever drove this man to the woods had taken every last piece of humanity from him, leaving nothing but a wild animal in human form. Up ahead, I saw what looked like a ranger station, just an old weather-beaten cabin on stilts. It was a long shot, but if I could get inside and lock the door, maybe I'd have a chance. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, and made it to the cabin, throwing myself up the steps and slamming the door behind me. I wasn't safe yet, and I knew it. I bolted it shut, every nerve in my body firing as I pressed my back against the wood, trying to catch my breath. Outside, I could hear his footsteps slowing, then stopping. A shadow fell over the window, and then I heard it again. That voice. Low, mocking. "You can't hide from me, not out here." He pressed his face to the window, his grin widening, those teeth glinting in the dull morning light. He was holding something in his hand, a small tattered notebook worn down with age. He opened it, and that's when I saw the names written inside, each one crossed out, followed by a crude sketch of the forest, a line leading to a little X. My name was the last one on the list. I felt something shift inside me, a primal surge of fight or flight that almost drove me to open the door and charge him head-on. Instead, I grabbed the first thing I saw, a rusted fire poker by the cabin's old stove, and held it out like a weapon. The man laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that bounced off the trees outside. "You're not the first," he sneered, "but you're the last, today anyway." He backed up a few steps as if giving me a head start, and I took the opportunity to scan the cabin. There was an old radio on the counter, and I scrambled over, twisting the knobs, praying for even the faintest signal. Static crackled, and then, miraculously, a voice came through, muffled but there. "This is Ranger Station 14. Do you copy?" "Yes," I shouted, breathless. "Please, I'm in trouble. There's someone." Before I could finish, the window shattered. The man's hand shot through, clawing at the air, barely missing me. I ducked down, clutching the radio like a lifeline as he banged against the door, each hit harder than the last. "Just you and me now," he growled, his voice rising into a manic, almost gleeful tone. "No one's coming." The banging grew louder, more forceful, and I knew the door wouldn't hold. In a last-ditch effort, I pulled a chair up under the door handle, grabbed the fire poker, and braced myself. The door splintered, and he stepped through, eyes gleaming with an unholy excitement. He lunged toward me, but I swung the poker, catching him across the face. He staggered back, laughing, a sick, twisted laugh that echoed through the cabin. Blood dripped from a gash on his cheek, and he wiped it away, smearing it like war paint across his face. I charged, swinging the poker again, and this time it hit hard enough that he dropped to one knee. But he was strong, almost inhumanly so, and he grabbed my wrist, twisting it until the poker fell from my grip. He pushed me to the ground, his hand around my throat, and I could feel his hot breath against my face as he leaned in close. "See, the thing about the woods," he whispered, "is they swallow up people like you." With a sudden burst of strength, I shoved him off, scrambling to my feet. He lunged again, but this time I was ready. I grabbed the fire poker and plunged it into his chest. He staggered, his mouth opening in a silent scream as he fell backward, clutching the poker embedded in his chest. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up again. I ran out of that cabin, not stopping until I reached the trailhead. The rangers found him the next day, dead and stiff on the cabin floor. They said his name was Elroy Fitch, a local who had gone missing a decade earlier, only to resurface now as some kind of feral predator. His journal was filled with sketches of his victims' final paths through the woods. They didn't ask me much, just took my statement and told me to get some rest. I left that day, my RV untouched, his final words echoing in my mind. The woods swallow up people like you. My name is Brian Patel, and back in 2019, I embarked on an RV camping trip to the remote stretches of Idaho's Sawtooth National Forest. Ever since I was a kid, I found solace in the great outdoors. It's where I feel most at home, away from the hustle of city life and the constant ping of notifications. I had recently purchased a second-hand RV, a bit rusty around the edges, but still reliable. Friends joked that it had more character than horsepower, but I liked it that way. I stocked up on essentials, loaded my mountain bike, and set off with the kind of optimism you get when escaping routine. The drive was tranquil, the kind where the radio fades into the background, and you're left alone with your thoughts. Pine trees blurred past as I navigated winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere all at once. About 100 miles into the forest, I found a clearing by a serene lake that looked like a postcard come to life. Setting up camp was straightforward. I parked the RV to face the water, propped open a chair and cracked open a cold beer. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the lake's mirror-like surface. It was the kind of beauty that made you wonder why you didn't do this more often. The first night was uneventful, filled with the comforting sounds of nature. Crickets chirped in a harmonious chorus while the gentle lapping of water against the shore acted as a lullaby. I fell asleep easily, wrapped in a blanket of stars visible through the RV's skylight. The next morning, I decided to take my bike out for a trail ride. The path was rugged, peppered with roots and rocks that demanded focus, a welcome challenge. About 5 miles in, I noticed something odd, a series of wooden symbols carved into the trees. They were intricate, almost artistic, but gave off an unsettling vibe. One looked like an eye, another like a hand, and others were shapes I couldn't decipher. I shrugged it off as local art, or perhaps markers left by hikers. Maybe someone was trying to be the next Banksy of the wilderness. Still, a joke formed in my mind. If a tree gets vandalized in the forest and no one's around to see it, does it lower the property value? As the day wore on, the trail became denser. The canopy overhead thickened, allowing slivers of sunlight to pierce through like spotlights on a dim stage. I was about to turn back when I stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin hidden behind a curtain of ivy and overgrown bushes. Curiosity got the better of me. The cabin looked like it hadn't been inhabited in decades. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Stepping inside, I was hit by a musty odor, a mix of damp wood and something else, something metallic. The interior was sparse, a broken table, a moldy chair, and strange symbols, similar to the ones on the trees, etched onto the walls. A sense of unease settled in my stomach. Maybe it's time to head back, I thought, but as I turned to leave, my foot caught on something. Looking down, I saw the edge of a rug protruding from under the debris. I pulled it back to reveal a trapdoor. Now, any sensible person might have left right then, but I've been told that my curiosity could be the death of me. Hopefully just a figure of speech. I lifted the trapdoor, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. Using the flashlight from my bike kit, I illuminated the passageway. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the walls worn, with roots protruding like skeletal fingers. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a larger space, a room lined with shelves filled with jars. As I approached, the contents became horrifyingly clear. Preserved animals, odd specimens floating in formaldehyde, and other things that made my skin crawl. Then I saw them. Photographs pinned to a corkboard, images of people, candid shots taken from a distance, hikers, campers, families. My breath caught in my throat when I recognized myself in one of the photos, taken at the lake where I'd set up camp. The caption scribbled below read, "New arrival, alone." A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Jokes aside, this was no laughing matter. I had to get out of there. As I turned to leave, a faint sound echoed down the tunnel, the unmistakable creak of the cabin's front door. Panic surged through me. I doused the flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, listening intently. Footsteps moved overhead, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was, they were dragging something heavy. The sound of metal scraping against wood sent a shiver down my spine. I needed an escape route. Scanning the room, I noticed a narrow passage partially hidden behind a shelf. It was a tight squeeze, but it might be my only way out. I squeezed through, the rough walls scraping against my jacket. The passage led upward, curving slightly, until I found myself behind a thicket a few yards from the cabin. Peering through the leaves, I saw him. A tall, gaunt man with unkempt hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He wore a stained flannel shirt and carried an old axe over his shoulder. He dropped a large sack onto the ground with a thud. Something rolled out. A deer carcass. Relief washed over me momentarily, until he pulled out a large hunting knife and began to skin the animal with unsettling precision. There was something methodical, almost ritualistic about his movements. I knew I had to get back to my RV and leave immediately. Keeping low, I moved silently through the underbrush, every snapped twig sounding like a gunshot in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the trail and mounted my bike, pedaling as fast as I could. The forest, which had seemed so inviting before, now felt like it was closing in on me. Shadows stretched longer, and every rustle of leaves sounded like impending danger. I reached my campsite, adrenaline pumping. Throwing my bike aside, I jumped into the RV and fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I didn't bother securing anything inside. Getting out was the only priority. As I steered onto the narrow road, a figure emerged from the tree line ahead, the same man from the cabin. He stood in the middle of the path, eyes fixed on me. There was no time to stop. I veered off to the side, the RV's tires crunching over rocks and roots. He didn't follow, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him watching me disappear down the road, a sinister smile creeping across his face. I drove non-stop until I reached the nearest town, a small community called Stanley. Pulling into a gas station, I parked and tried to collect myself. My hands trembled as I dialed the local sheriff's office. An officer named Deputy Harris arrived shortly after. He was a stout man with a firm handshake and a skeptical gaze. I recounted everything: the cabin, the photos, the man. He took notes but maintained a stoic expression. "You're not the first to report something like this," he admitted. "We've had a few hikers go missing over the past decade, but we've never found any concrete evidence." "Well, now you have a location," I insisted. "You have to check it out." He nodded. "We'll look into it. In the meantime, I'd advise you to stay in town until we get this sorted." I agreed, though the idea of spending more time in the area was less than appealing. I checked into a small motel, the kind where the floral wallpaper hasn't changed since the 70s. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the building made me jump. Around midnight, hunger got the better of me, and I decided to visit the all-night diner across the street. The place was nearly empty, except for a waitress and a lone customer seated at the counter. I took a booth by the window and ordered a coffee and a slice of pie. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, gave me a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" she asked. "You could say that," I replied. The door chimed as another patron entered. Glancing up, my heart skipped a beat. It was the man from the cabin. He looked different, cleaner somehow, dressed in a plaid shirt and jeans. He walked in casually and took a seat at the counter, and 2 stools away from the other customer. Was it really him, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't be sure. I decided to play it cool and not draw attention to myself. The waitress greeted him warmly. "Evening, Caleb. The usual?" He nodded. "Thanks, Margie." Caleb, that was his name. He seemed familiar to her. A regular, maybe. I was mistaken, perhaps. Just a case of small-town residents bearing a resemblance to one another. I overheard snippets of their conversation. "How's the farm?" Margie asked. "Can't complain. Harvest season's been kind to us," he replied. I felt a wave of relief. This man seemed normal, friendly even. Maybe the stress was getting to me, causing me to see threats where there were none. Just then, the other customer at the counter stood up to leave. As he turned, I caught his face, a rugged-looking fellow with a scar running down his cheek. He gave me a nod and exited the diner. Caleb watched him leave, his friendly demeanor slipping ever so slightly. His gaze then shifted, locking eyes with me. A sly grin formed on his lips. "You're not from around here, are you?" he called out. I swallowed hard. "Just passing through," I answered. He picked up his coffee mug and walked over to my booth. "Mind if I join you?" Actually, I did mind, but I couldn't think of a polite way to refuse. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. He slid into the seat across from me. Up close, I could see a small tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, a series of symbols similar to those I'd seen carved into the trees and cabin walls. "Name's Caleb," he offered, extending his hand. "Brian," I replied, shaking it. "Unusual name. What's got you visiting our little corner of the world?" "Just some RV camping. Needed a break from city life." He nodded slowly. "The forest can be a peaceful place, or not, depending on where you wander." There was an edge to his voice now. The friendly facade was fading. "Yeah, had a bit of a scare earlier," I admitted, hoping honesty might diffuse whatever this was. "Came across an old cabin. Thought I saw something strange." "Strange things have a way of finding strangers," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. Margie interrupted by bringing over his meal, a bowl of chili and a slice of cornbread. "Here you go, hun." "Thanks," he replied, but his focus remained on me. I decided to test the waters. "You ever hear stories about that area? Maybe about people going missing?" He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Can't say I have, but then again, folks around here tend to mind their own business." Silence hung between us. I felt an urgent need to leave. "Well, it's getting late. I should probably head back." He smiled. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." I left a few bills on the table and stood up. As I turned to go, he spoke again. "Be careful out there, Thaddeus. The woods aren't always as empty as they seem." I hurried back to the motel, every instinct telling me to get out of town immediately. Back in my room, I packed my belongings and decided to drive through the night. As I exited the motel, I noticed a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Unfolding it, I saw it was one of the photographs from the cabin. This one of me, sitting by the lake, circled in red ink. Panic surged anew. I jumped into the RV and sped off, not caring about speed limits or the noise of the engine. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw headlights turn on and follow, but I couldn't be sure. After hours of driving, I crossed state lines and didn't stop until I reached a large town with plenty of people around. A few days later, I contacted the state police, providing them with all the information I had. They took my statement seriously and assured me they'd investigate. Weeks went by, and I received a call from a detective, Monroe. "We searched the area you mentioned," he said. "Found the cabin and the underground room." "Did you find anything?" I asked. "Place was cleared out. No jars, no photographs, just an empty space." "What about the man, Caleb?" Local records show no one by that name matching your description. The diner you mentioned burned down last year. Margie, the waitress, died in the fire. A cold realization settled in. None of it made sense. Determined to find answers, I did some digging of my own, online forums, local newspaper archives, anything that could shed light on what I'd experienced. I stumbled upon an old article from 1995 about a man named Caleb Foster, a farmer who was suspected of multiple disappearances but was never charged. He died in a car crash 2 decades ago. But that was impossible. I'd met him, or someone pretending to be him. To this day, I don't know who or what I encountered in that small Idaho town, but I do know one thing. Some roads are better left untraveled. It all started with an offhand joke. You hear enough bad jokes in my line of work, but this one stood out. It was 2004, somewhere deep in the North Carolina woods, the kind of place tourists don't even know exists. I had been on 100 missions before, but this one seemed simple. Find the locals who had gone missing and bring them back, dead or alive. I joined the Green Berets for the adrenaline, for the chance to do something meaningful. But over the years, that rush started to fade, until that damn joke. Some of the local cops, the ones I was meant to coordinate with, had this thing where they'd whisper around me like they were afraid to say something out loud. One of them, a big guy named Remy, who always chewed tobacco and spat on his own boots, leaned in one night while I was cleaning my rifle and said, "The woods don't like strangers much. They got their own rules. And yeah, sometimes they eat folks who break 'em." I remember rolling my eyes and grunting something about old wives' tales, but it stuck with me. I mean, I'd been through enough to know that when locals get weird, there's usually a reason. So I took it as a heads up, though I didn't believe in superstitions. Not then, anyway. By the time we got out there, me, Remy, and a few other locals we picked up, the sun was slipping low behind the trees, giving us just enough time to set up a base camp. I didn't like the idea of working with the local guys, especially Remy, who cracked more jokes than a man should. But orders are orders. One of them, Pete, had lived out here all his life. He swore he'd seen bears doing strange things, but I didn't pay it much mind. Bears don't take people whole, and they sure as hell don't drag them away without leaving a mess. Remy, Pete, and I split up to cover more ground. Remy took the creek bed. Pete took the ridge above it. That left me with the thickest part of the woods, where the trees leaned in close like a suffocating crowd. I could feel the humidity seeping through my clothes. The air smelled like pine and something rotten underneath. It wasn't long before I found my first clue. A bloody shirt, half buried under a pile of leaves, like something had tried to hide it, but didn't care to do it right. The thing about finding blood is it's never a good sign. But this wasn't the splatter of a struggle or the spray you get when something big goes down. No, this was something else. Methodical. I pressed on, radioing Remy and Pete every 15 minutes like we'd planned. No answers. But I could hear faint static, just enough to know the radios weren't dead. It's just that they weren't responding. By dusk, I found more. Pieces of a tent, torn like they'd been shredded by claws, though not the kind you'd expect. No signs of struggle, no trap. Just a creeping sense that something was off. Then I found the bones, not scattered, not chewed, laid out in a pattern. Deliberate, like someone had taken their time setting them out, like a child making a stick figure in the dirt. There was no mistaking it. Human. I cracked another joke over the radio, something dumb about arts and crafts, but got nothing back. The silence sat heavy, but I pushed on. Maybe they were messing with me, trying to scare the new guy from out of town. That's when I heard it. A snapping sound, low to the ground, like someone or something breaking branches. I kept my rifle at the ready and pushed through a thicket. That's when I spotted Remy's body, or at least what was left of it. Slumped against a tree, his guts spilled out like someone had unzipped him. There was no sign of Pete. I didn't get close enough to see much more, because of what stood over Remy's corpse. It looked like a wolf. If wolves walked on 2 legs. Its fur was matted, dripping with blood that wasn't its own. Its teeth, longer, thinner than they should be, gleamed in the dim light. It didn't look right. Didn't move right. My first thought was that maybe it was a man, some freaky local in a get-up trying to scare me. But then it crouched low, sniffing at the air, and I knew better. This thing wasn't interested in me, at least not yet. I dropped down, hoping the thick brush would hide me. My breath came out in short bursts. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might hear me. I didn't have a clean shot. And this wasn't the kind of thing you wanted to miss. I watched it turn its head, almost like it was listening for something. Then it stood up and started walking toward the trees. Its limbs moved in jerky, unnatural ways, and I got the impression that whatever it was, it didn't belong in a world that made sense. I waited until it was far enough, then crawled back to where Remy lay, took what was left of his radio, and tried to call for backup. Static. Just static. Pete still wasn't responding either. I thought about turning back to camp, but I couldn't leave without knowing what happened to Pete. Maybe he found a way out, maybe he was just lost in the dark. Or maybe he wasn't. I found Pete an hour later, hanging from a tree, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Below him, more bones, some fresh, some old. There was a skull, cracked open like a walnut. And for the first time in my life, I was scared in a way I hadn't been, even when bullets were flying. This wasn't just about some missing folks anymore. This was a burial ground, a damn feeding ground. I've seen death before, but not like this. Not methodical, not like a ritual. I radioed again, whispering this time, as if keeping my voice low might make me less real to whatever was out there. My rifle felt heavy, useless, but I kept it clutched in my hands like a lifeline. I needed to find a way back, but then I heard that same snapping sound, closer this time. It didn't come from the ground, it came from above. That's when I saw them. More of those things, climbing through the treetops like giant bats, their limbs twisting around branches like they had extra joints. There were at least 3 of them, but they moved so fast I couldn't keep count. I stayed perfectly still, hoping they'd miss me, but one of them leapt down, landing in front of me with a soft thud, like a cat dropping from a fence. I didn't think. I fired, 3 rounds into its chest. It staggered back, but the thing didn't go down. It shrieked, not like an animal, not like anything I had ever heard. A kind of sound that drilled into your skull and rattled around in your head. But it bled, and that gave me a sliver of hope. I fired again, aiming for its head, and this time it dropped, twitching on the ground like a dying fish. The others noticed. They dropped from the trees, their claws scraping bark as they hit the ground. I ran. I've never run so fast in my life, and I didn't look back, not even when I heard them crashing through the underbrush behind me. My legs burned, my lungs felt like they were tearing apart, but I ran until I stumbled into a clearing and saw the lights of a cabin up ahead. I crashed through the door, slamming it shut behind me. An old man sat in a rickety chair by the fireplace, staring at me like I had just interrupted his dinner. He didn't seem surprised to see a soldier covered in blood, carrying a smoking rifle. He just looked at me, his expression flat, like he was watching a rerun of a TV show he'd seen 1,000 times before. I asked him if he had a phone, a radio, anything. He just shook his head and said, "They come for what they want, and then they leave. Always have." He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared past me, like he was looking through the walls. He started talking about the woods like they were alive, about how sometimes the forest decides who stays and who goes. I didn't have time for his riddles. I barricaded the windows, checked my ammunition, and asked him if he knew a way out. He just laughed, this low, gravelly sound that echoed in the small room. "You don't get out, son. You just survive." And then he went quiet, staring into the flames, as if that was all that mattered. I watched through the window as the things circled the cabin, their silhouettes barely visible in the shadows beyond the firelight. One of them came closer, dragging something behind it. Pete's body. It left him just outside, like bait. That's when I made my decision. I grabbed a lantern and the last of my ammunition and told the old man to stay inside. He just nodded, like he'd heard it all before. I stepped outside, the cold hitting me like a slap. They were waiting, their heads cocked to one side, like they were curious, like they wanted to see what I'd do. I lit the lantern, smashed it against the cabin wall, and watched as the flames leapt up, catching on the dry wood. I figured if I couldn't get out, I'd take them down with me. The fire spread fast, crackling through the walls, but the creatures didn't flinch. They just watched as the flames consumed the cabin. That's when I realized the old man wasn't just resigned. He was one of them, or something like them, part of whatever lived out there in the woods. I shot at one of the creatures, catching it in the leg. It stumbled but didn't go down. The others lunged. I fought like hell, but they were faster. One of them grabbed my arm, twisting it until I heard the snap. I dropped to the ground, fighting the pain as I clawed for my rifle, but they knocked it out of reach. Then they stopped. One of them let out a high-pitched yelp, and the others retreated into the shadows, as if called back. I lay there, panting, my vision swimming. And then I saw it, their leader, standing on two legs, staring at me with something like curiosity. It leaned down close, sniffing the air, and then it turned and lopped off into the trees, dragging Pete's body with it. I don't know why they left me alive. Maybe it was some twisted game. Maybe it was their way of letting me deliver the message. But as I lay there, staring up at the burning cabin, I realized what the old man meant. You don't get out, you just survive. And they let you remember. By dawn, a search party found me. They didn't find the old man, and they sure as hell didn't find Pete. They asked me what happened, but I didn't give them any answers they'd believe. They patched me up, got me out of the woods, and that was that. I left without saying a word. I got out, sure. But sometimes I think about Remy, about Pete, about what those things really are, part animal, part nightmare. Maybe they were here long before us, just waiting for the woods to change back to the way they liked it. And then I heard the final joke from one of the locals, the one that almost made me laugh. Maybe the woods just didn't like your jokes, stranger. It was in 2005, somewhere in the middle of Montana, right near the edge of a national forest no one really bothered to visit. That was the point, though, wasn't it? A place no one paid attention to. My name is Austin Gibson. Yeah, I know, sounds like a TV detective. But that's where the comparisons end. I wasn't chasing down bad guys in an old convertible. I was a grunt on a mission that wasn't supposed to be written down anywhere. They gave us vague orders. Survey a part of the forest, collect data, watch for unusual activity, whatever that meant. Sounded more like a field trip than a military op, and we sure as hell weren't in uniform for this one. The forest was dense, trees twisted and grown wild like the land had a mind of its own. No trails, no clearings, just miles of green swallowing the sky. And when you're deep in a place like that, with the crunch of dead leaves underfoot and shadows creeping in from every angle, you get that prickling feeling, like you're walking into something's living room uninvited. We were a team of 4, all of us in civilian gear. James Chen, a guy with a background in tracking, think of him as a walking encyclopedia for animal signs. Mario Costa, our medic, always had a dirty joke ready, usually about our moms. And Jan Walsh, the kind of guy who kept to himself but had the best poker face I'd ever seen. You never knew if he was joking or being serious, made him real annoying on a long mission, but he was solid when things went sideways. We set up camp about 12 clicks from the last known logging road, in a clearing that barely qualified as one. No fire. Command had warned against it. Night came down fast. The kind that wraps around you and hides everything more than 5 feet away. Chen started in about mountain lions and grizzlies, like we needed reminding. Walsh cut in with a story about a guy he knew who'd been mauled, and then Costa, true to form, made some crack about how none of us would last a day on a dating app. The usual stuff to keep things light. Around midnight we heard it, a sound that didn't fit. Not the wind. Not a branch breaking, but something dragging itself over rocks, like nails scraping against gravel. Chen's head snapped up, his hand already on the rifle we weren't supposed to use unless absolutely necessary. We went quiet, listening, letting the forest swallow us. Walsh motioned forward and we followed him in a staggered line, creeping through the underbrush. The noise led us to a narrow ravine about 100 yards from our camp. That's where we found the first body. A deer, but not any kind of kill I'd seen before. Its ribs had been pulled apart like someone tried to crack open a walnut and then gave up halfway. But it wasn't just that. Something had gnawed through its spine. Chen crouched over it, poking around with a stick. He muttered something about no tracks, no claw marks, but his voice shook a bit, like he didn't believe his own assessment. We turned back, leaving the carcass, figuring it was just a fluke. A one-off. That assumption didn't last. Not when we found the second one. This time a fox, gutted and left tangled in the roots of a tree. And not when Costa stumbled upon the third, something with too much blood for a small animal splattered across the rocks like someone took a paint can to it. By the third day, we weren't talking much. We knew better than to spook each other, but hell, it's hard to stay calm when every other step you take, you feel like there's someone breathing down your neck. But still, we had orders. Collect the data, watch for anything odd, report back. Except there was no radio signal out there, so we were on our own until we made it back to the rendezvous point. That night, Costa disappeared. 1 minute he was next to me, making some joke about the lack of cell service, and then he wasn't. We assumed he'd gone to take a leak. No one thought much of it. Until 20 minutes passed, then 30. I called out. Walsh too. Nothing. We grabbed flashlights and fanned out. I found his rifle, just lying there against a tree, but no sign of him, no sound. It wasn't like Costa to just wander off. He wasn't the adventurous type. We spent the next few hours searching, but all we found was a smudge of blood on a tree trunk. Not enough to mean anything definite. Just a smear, like he'd cut his hand and touched the bark. Chen said maybe he fell into the ravine, broke something. But we checked there, and there wasn't a trace of him. That's when the dread settled in, thick and heavy. The next morning we heard a scream. I've heard men scream before, in combat, when a bullet catches them in a bad spot. This wasn't like that. It came from the east, somewhere deep in the woods. We all froze, listening. Chen's face went pale. He muttered that it wasn't Costa, that it didn't sound like him. We moved toward the sound, rifles raised, hearts pounding like we were back in a firefight. We found Costa, all right, or what was left of him. His body lay face down, half submerged in a shallow stream, the back of his skull missing. But that wasn't what got to me. It was the way his limbs were twisted, like something had tried to pull him apart but hadn't finished the job. Chen lost it. Started cursing, pacing back and forth, saying it didn't make sense. Kept repeating that there should have been tracks. But there was nothing. Just drag marks in the dirt that led into the thick trees. Walsh pointed out that Costa's sidearm was missing. That's when it hit us. He'd tried to fight back. Whatever took him, he'd put up a struggle. But it didn't matter. We should have left right then. Forget the mission, forget the orders. Just hike out and get to the nearest town. But there's a kind of pride that keeps you from doing the smart thing. Maybe it was the training. Maybe it was that unspoken rule that you don't leave a man behind. So we stayed. We buried what was left of Costa under some rocks and pushed further into the forest, following those drag marks. Around noon, we found an old cabin, or what was left of it. Just some rotted wood and a chimney that leaned like it was tired of standing up. Chen went inside, looking for signs of life, but all he found was dust and an old bear trap, rusted shut. We were about to leave when I noticed something carved into the wood near the door. Symbols, almost like the kind you'd find in some backwoods superstition. Not that I believed in that stuff, but they looked fresh, like someone had scratched them in not too long ago. Walsh said we should keep moving, but I could tell he was just as spooked as the rest of us. As we stepped away, I caught a glimpse of something in the trees. A shadow that didn't quite fit, a shape that seemed to shift, then vanish when I blinked. Chen saw it too, and we shared a look. No one said anything. What was the point? We'd all seen it. We'd all seen too much already. No one said anything. What was the point? We'd all seen it. We'd all seen too much already. That night we set up a perimeter, flashlights and a few makeshift traps, but it was a joke, really. Whatever took Costa wasn't going to trip over some wire and cans. We stayed awake in shifts, but sleep wouldn't have come anyway. Not with that feeling creeping over us like we were being studied. When it came to my turn, I sat with my back against a tree, rifle across my lap, scanning the darkness. That's when I saw it again, just outside the circle of light, something hunched and wrong. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar. It moved like a deer, but with limbs too long, like it didn't know how they were supposed to bend. It stepped forward just enough for me to catch a glimpse of its face, or what I thought was a face. Too smooth, too human in a way that twisted your gut. I froze, finger on the trigger, but before I could take a shot, it bolted, silent as a whisper, back into the trees. I thought I imagined it, but then I heard the crash of branches behind me. Chen stumbling out of his position, his face pale. He'd seen it too. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked and he just shook his head. It came for us before dawn. A shriek cut through the air and suddenly Walsh was gone. 1 second he was beside me. The next there was a smear of blood across the dirt where he'd been standing. Chen and I fired into the dark, not aiming, just shooting, hoping it would scare off whatever the hell was out there. For a second I thought it worked. But then I heard a crunch behind me. I spun around, flashlight sweeping across the ground, and there it was, dragging Walsh into the underbrush. I fired, the recoil slamming into my shoulder, and the thing dropped Walsh, but it didn't run. It just turned, twisted its neck to look at me, and I'll never forget that. The way it stared, like it was trying to decide if I was worth the effort. Chen charged it, knife in hand. He'd run out of bullets. It swiped at him, sent him sprawling into the dirt. But he got a good slice in, tore open its side. Something spilled out of it, not quite blood, not quite anything I could identify. It let out a sound like an animal in pain, but worse. I grabbed Chen and we ran. Left everything behind. Gear, supplies, Costa's grave. We didn't stop, didn't look back. We reached the edge of the forest just as the sun was coming up. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't care. I kept dragging Chen along until we finally reached the nearest logging road. A beat-up truck was parked there, some old guy with a shotgun leaning against the hood. He looked at us, then at the blood on our clothes, and just nodded, like he'd seen it all before. He drove us to a town without asking questions. We didn't offer any answers. They called it a cougar attack when we reported it. Didn't even bother searching for Walsh or Costa, just shrugged and said, "That's the way it goes out here." But I knew better, and so did Chen. Though he never talked about it again, didn't even stay in touch. Last I heard, he moved down south. Said he needed to be somewhere flat, somewhere open. I went back to that forest once, years later, just to see if there was anything left of the cabin, or the symbols on the door. But the place was gone, like it had never been there in the first place. No signs, no ruins, just trees and silence. But every so often I hear about another missing hiker, another body found, torn open like a fruit. Maybe it's moved on, maybe it hasn't, but whatever it is, it's out there, and it's not done yet. Something that knows we're not supposed to be in its woods. And one of these days, someone's going to find out what it really is. Maybe they'll be luckier than we were. Or maybe not. My name's Jeremy Harris, and this happened back in 1999 in the thick pine stretches of Idaho's Payette National Forest. Now, I'm not some storytelling type, but when you've seen what I've seen, it sits with you whether you want it to or not. I've been with the Forest Service for nearly a decade, mostly search and rescue, but I don't really get a thrill out of finding folks lost off the trails. It's just a job, you know, pays the bills and keeps my folks from worrying too much. But this wasn't a typical day at work. The call came in just past noon. 2 teenagers had gone missing around Lake Cascade while hiking, and their moms swore up and down that they wouldn't have wandered off the marked trails. Typical, I thought. Parents always claim their kids aren't the type to take risks, and they end up climbing a cliffside or venturing miles off the paths. I radioed in, grabbed my pack, and met up with my buddy Matt Taylor at the ranger station. We'd handled plenty of search missions together, so we had our system down pat. By the time we started the hike, the sun was a half-hearted glow behind thick clouds, casting a dim greyness over the woods. We headed up the main trail, our boots crunching over the underbrush and fallen pine needles. I remember making some wisecrack about the kids probably sitting by the lake with no cell signal, blissfully unaware of the mini panic they'd sparked. Matt chuckled and responded with something about making up for our overtime with the stash of cold beers back at the station. Just another day on the job. Or so I thought. It wasn't long before we hit signs of trouble. About a mile up, we found what looked like a small campsite, scattered granola bar wrappers, a disposable camera, and a dirty sweatshirt lying next to a patch of trampled ferns. But something was off about the setup. It didn't feel like kids were lounging around here. It felt more like someone had run through. The air was heavy, and I could smell this rank, earthy stench that was wrong for the forest. Matt raised an eyebrow at me like he was feeling it too. We called out a few times, half expecting the teens to stumble out of the bushes, embarrassed and red-faced. But nothing stirred except a few startled birds. That eerie silence filled the gaps where sound should be. I knelt down, trying to get a sense of what had gone down here. There was a sharp imprint in the dirt, something like a claw mark, but wider and deeper than any animal I'd seen in these woods. I brushed my fingers over it, feeling the jagged lines. Whatever made that wasn't anything natural. "You seeing this?" Jeremy Harris had spotted something farther up. A chunk of what looked like torn fabric caught on a low-hanging branch. It was a piece of a t-shirt stained dark, likely blood. A chill settled over me then, the realization sinking in. Whatever was out here wasn't just a wild animal. We both knew when to trust our gut, and mine was screaming that we were in over our heads. We pressed on, calling their names, but now every rustle in the bushes had me glancing over my shoulder. About a mile deeper into the woods, we found the first body. It was one of the teens, a boy face down with his arm twisted under him at an unnatural angle. His body was mangled in a way that no mountain lion or bear would have done. His torso was scratched open, not by claws, but by something else. Something that seemed to tear rather than slash. Matt stepped back, a grimace on his face, muttering something I didn't quite catch. We checked for signs of life, even though it was obvious we'd be wasting our time. He was gone. Worse yet, the terror etched onto his face told us this was no accident, no animal mishap. It was a hunt. We radioed back to the station, giving as calm a report as we could manage. They told us to stay put, that backup was on the way. But Matt and I exchanged a look. Sitting still in the woods with God knows what lurking around? Not likely. We agreed to find higher ground and keep watch until help arrived, but something told me that wouldn't be enough. Just as we started back toward a nearby ridge, we heard a faint sound, a low, uneven clicking like stones scraping together. It was rhythmic and unnatural, like it had intent behind it. Matt raised his flashlight, sweeping it in a wide arc. I followed his beam, and for a moment we saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, between 2 thick pines, a shape appeared. It was unlike anything I'd seen, like a mix between a lizard and something much larger. It moved low to the ground, with a long, scaly body and limbs that looked almost human in shape, though bent and twisted in a way no human could ever walk. Its skin was dark and rough, patched with what looked like scales. But the strangest part was its head, elongated with a wide, flat mouth and jagged rows of what I can only describe as crocodile-like teeth. Matt and I froze. The thing paused, raising its head as if it sensed us. Then, with a sharp hiss, it lunged forward. I didn't have time to think. My instincts took over, and I yanked Matt to the side, just as it shot past us, swiping the air with a clawed arm. We bolted up the ridge, tripping over roots and rocks in our haste. But it was on us, relentless, snapping its jaws and thrashing through the underbrush with every step. I remember yelling at Matt to split off, hoping to confuse it, or at least buy us some time. He hesitated, but the look on my face must have convinced him, and he veered off to the left. I dove to the right, dodging trees and scrambling up a small incline. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the forest, tearing at anything in its path. There was no mercy, no pause. It was like it had locked onto us, hungry and unyielding. I lost track of Matt in the chaos, my mind racing as I looked for any place to hide. I spotted a small crevice between two rocks and dove in, pressing myself flat against the earth, hoping it would lose my scent. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of Matt's scream, cutting through the forest. It was short, choked off, and I knew he'd met the same fate as the teenager back at the campsite. The clicking sound grew fainter, and I dared to lift my head. My legs were numb, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away, but the forest around me was silent again. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, watching the trees, waiting for any sign of movement. When I was sure it was safe, I crawled out, my legs unsteady, and started the long trek back to the station, alone. When I returned to the ranger station, the backup was just arriving. They looked at me like I'd gone mad when I tried to explain what happened. They asked about Matt, and I told them the truth, as much as they would believe. We went back out to search, but we only found remnants. Torn pieces of clothing, broken branches, drag marks leading deeper into the forest. No sign of Matt, no bodies. Nothing to prove what we'd seen, except my own word. Months later, I did some digging, trying to find any hint of what that creature was. Local legends spoke of a predator, something that roamed these woods centuries ago, rumored to be a guardian or a curse, depending on who you asked. They called it the Elakal, a name whispered by those who claimed to have seen it before vanishing into the wilderness. They said it only showed itself to those who dared to encroach on its territory, too far, too boldly, as if it needed to remind us that we were still trespassers here. That creature, it wasn't just hunting, it was sending a message, loud and clear. I remember that trip like it was yesterday. Took the RV up to the Ozarks, me and my buddy Stan. We were looking for a quiet place to fish, maybe drink a few beers and shoot the breeze. We found a spot near a lake, tucked away in the woods. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. We set up camp, got the fire going, and just relaxed. Nothing fancy, just two old friends enjoying the great outdoors. Stan was a character, always had a story or a joke. He worked in construction, had the rough hands and tan skin to prove it. I'd known him since high school, and though our lives had taken different paths, we always found time for trips like these. He had this laugh that could fill a room, or in this case, the entire forest. We spent the first day just fishing off the dock, not catching much, but that didn't matter. The air was crisp, the beer was cold, and the conversation was easy. By nightfall, we had a small feast of canned beans and grilled sausages, washed down with a few more beers. The stars were out in full force, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. It felt like we were the only two people on Earth. The second day, we decided to explore the woods a bit. Stan wanted to find a good hiking trail he'd heard about. We didn't have any maps, just his vague memories from some article he read. We wandered through the trees, laughing about how lost we were going to get. The woods were dense, but not intimidating, just a lot of green, the smell of pine, and the rustle of leaves underfoot. We found the trail eventually. It led us to an old abandoned cabin. It was creepy, sure, but we were more curious than anything. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. We poked around a bit, finding nothing but dust and cobwebs. Stan joked about it being haunted, but we both knew better. Just an old shack forgotten by time. By the time we got back to camp, the sun was setting. We were tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from a day well spent. We settled in for another night around the fire, feeling content. And then we heard it, a scream. Not an animal, but a human scream, somewhere off in the distance. It was faint but unmistakable. Stan and I looked at each other, the laughter gone from our faces. We weren't sure what to do. We couldn't just ignore it, but we also didn't want to run blindly into the woods. We grabbed our flashlights and headed toward the sound cautiously. The woods at night were a different beast. Every shadow seemed to move, and the silence was heavy, oppressive. We called out but got no response. The scream had stopped, and there was no way to pinpoint where it had come from. After what felt like hours, we decided to head back to camp, uneasy but unsure what else to do. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every little noise had us on edge. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and we drifted off. I woke up to the smell of coffee and Stan's muttering. He was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, joining him. "Not really," he replied, eyes still fixed on the fire. "You?" "Barely," I admitted. "That scream." "Yeah," he finally looked at me. "Think we should check it out again?" "Maybe," I said, "but where do we even start?" We decided to retrace our steps from the previous night, hoping to find some clue we might have missed in the dark. The woods seemed less intimidating in the daylight, but the unease lingered. We walked in silence, our ears tuned to every sound. Then we found it, a patch of ground, disturbed. Dirt kicked up and something else. "Blood," Stan said. "Not a lot, but enough to make our hearts race." We followed the trail, and that's when we saw it, a body. Partially hidden by the underbrush. It was a man, or what was left of him. His clothes were torn, and his face was unrecognizable. Stan turned away, retching. "Jesus," I muttered, feeling my stomach churn. "What the hell happened here?" Stan wiped his mouth, his face pale. "We need to get help." We hurried back to camp, grabbed our phones and called the local sheriff. It took them a while to get out there, the area being so remote. When they arrived, they took our statements, asked a lot of questions we didn't have answers to. They didn't seem surprised, which was unsettling in its own way. The sheriff, a grizzled old man named Tomlin, pulled me aside. "You boys didn't see anything else? No one else out here?" "No, just the body," I said. "What do you think happened?" Tomlin sighed, looking tired. "Hard to say. Could be a lot of things. This area, it has a history. Folks around here talk about things in the woods. Could be a bear. Maybe something else. We'll investigate, but," he looked me dead in the eyes, "I wouldn't stick around if I were you." Stan and I packed up that day. The thrill of the trip was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of dread. We didn't talk much on the drive back. There wasn't much to say. What could we say? We had come out here for a break, a bit of fun, and instead we stumbled into a nightmare. Weeks passed and the story faded from the news. The official explanation was a wild animal attack. But there were whispers, rumors that didn't sit well. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something that wasn't a bear or a cougar. Stan and I kept in touch, but we didn't talk about the trip. It was like an unspoken agreement to leave it buried. But then, about a month later, Stan went missing. He had gone out on another trip, this time alone. His wife called me, frantic. I joined the search party, but we found nothing. Just his abandoned campsite, eerily similar to the one we had shared. The police chalked it up to another animal attack, but I knew better. There was something in those woods. Something that took Stan. I tried to tell the sheriff, but he dismissed me, said I was letting my imagination run wild. But I knew that whatever was out there was real, and it had a taste for blood. I started digging, looking into local legends and folklore. That's when I came across the stories of the Nyx, a creature said to haunt the Ozarks, preying on those who wander too far from safety. The descriptions varied, but the one constant was its hunger, its need to hunt. I don't know if I believe in monsters, not in the traditional sense, but I believe there's something out there, something that took my friend. And I'll keep looking until I find it, or it finds me. Because one thing's for sure, the Nyx is real, and it's hungry. My name is Michael Joseph, and this happened to me on August 15th, 2007. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend away from the noise and stress of the city. I'd taken the RV out to the woods near Salt Creek in the Kiamishi Mountains of Oklahoma. I like to camp alone sometimes, just me, nature, and a cooler full of beer. No phones, no internet, just peace and quiet. I arrived around noon, found a nice spot by the creek and set up camp. The place was deserted, just as I had hoped. I parked the RV under a big oak tree, close enough to the water to hear it gurgling over the rocks. After setting up a small fire pit and getting my fishing gear ready, I cracked open a beer and settled into my folding chair, feeling the stress of the city melt away. The first day was perfect. I caught a couple of fish, enough for dinner, and spent the evening cooking over the fire and listening to the sounds of the forest. By nightfall, the sky was clear, and the stars were out in full force. I stretched out on a blanket, stared up at the Milky Way, and thought about nothing in particular. Eventually, I crawled into the RV and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling refreshed. I decided to take a hike further upstream. I left most of my stuff at the campsite, taking only a small backpack with some water, snacks, and my hunting knife. The trail was faint, barely more than a game path, but it was easy enough to follow along the creek. The farther I went, the denser the forest became. The trees were taller, the underbrush thicker, and the sound of the creek echoed in a way that made everything seem both closer and farther away. About an hour into the hike, I found an old abandoned cabin. It was small, made of rough-hewn logs, and looked like it had been there for decades. The roof had partially caved in, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a look inside. The place was empty, just a few pieces of broken furniture and a rusted-out stove. There was a strange, musty smell, like wet earth and decay, but nothing too unusual for a place left to the elements. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd on the floor near the back wall. It looked like a small wooden trapdoor, half covered by a rotting rug. I moved the rug aside and tried to lift the door, but it was stuck. I pulled harder, and with a creak and a cloud of dust, it finally gave way. Beneath the door was a narrow, dark hole about the size of a manhole cover, leading down into the ground. A rusty metal ladder was bolted to one side, disappearing into the darkness below. I debated with myself for a moment, then decided to go down. I don't know why. Maybe it was the explorer in me, or maybe just plain stupidity. I clicked on my flashlight and started down the ladder. It was damp and cold, and the smell of wet earth grew stronger the deeper I went. The ladder ended after about 20 feet, dropping me into a small underground chamber. The walls were lined with stone, and the floor was covered in dirt and debris. At first glance, it looked like some kind of root cellar, but there was something off about it. I shone my light around and saw what looked like old tools and some rotting wood and crates. Then in the far corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were bones, human bones, scattered across the floor. Some looked old and brittle, but others seemed more recent, still covered in bits of rotting flesh. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest. I needed to get out of there. I turned to climb back up the ladder when I heard a noise behind me, a soft shuffling sound. I whipped around, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Nothing. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just rats or some other animal. But then I heard it again. Closer this time. I scrambled up the ladder, almost dropping my flashlight in my haste. I didn't look back until I was out of the hole and had slammed the trapdoor shut. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I needed to get back to the RV, get my phone and call the authorities. I started back down the trail, moving faster than I probably should have. About halfway back to the campsite, I heard something crashing through the underbrush behind me. I turned, expecting to see a deer or some other animal. Instead, I saw a shape, tall and hunched, moving through the trees. I couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette against the greenery. It moved strangely, almost like it was limping. I didn't wait to see more. I took off running, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the campsite and dove into the RV, locking the door behind me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. I cursed and threw the phone down, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. I started the engine, but as I looked out the window, I saw the shape again, moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing. It was closer now, and I could see more details. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with long, matted hair and a face that looked more animal than human. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward. I heard a thud and a scrape as something hit the side of the vehicle. I didn't stop. I drove down the narrow dirt road, branches scraping against the sides of the RV. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, back on the main road. I drove straight to the nearest town and went to the police station. I told them everything I'd seen. They looked skeptical, but agreed to send someone out to check the cabin. They asked me to stay in town in case they had more questions. I agreed, but I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't get the image of those bones out of my head, or the way that thing had moved through the trees. The next day, the police called me in. They said they'd found the cabin and the trapdoor, but no bones. The place looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. They asked if I might have imagined it, maybe had a bit too much to drink. I swore I hadn't, but they just gave me that look people give when they think you're crazy. They told me to go home and get some rest. I left town, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. I kept thinking about those bones and the way that thing had looked at me. I did some research when I got home, trying to find any information about the area. I found stories, old legends about a creature that lived in the woods, something the locals called Skog. It was supposed to be some kind of ancient spirit, a guardian of the forest that punished those who trespassed. I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing, but I can't deny what I saw. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I don't plan to. I sold the RV and moved to a different state, as far from Oklahoma as I could get. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that shuffling sound in my dreams, and I wonder if Skog is still out there, waiting. I'm not the same person I was before that weekend. I used to love the solitude of the wilderness, the peace and quiet. Now I can't stand being alone in the dark. I keep the lights on and always make sure my doors are locked. I guess some experiences change you in ways you can't fully understand until it's too late. There's one last thing. A few months after I moved, I got a call from the police in Oklahoma. They found another hiker, a young woman, dead near Salt Creek. Her body was badly decomposed, but they said the injuries didn't match any animal they knew. They asked if I remembered anything else, any other details that might help. I told them everything I could, but I don't think it made a difference. They closed the case as an animal attack, but I know better. I know what I saw. Skog is real, and it's still out there. So, if you ever find yourself near Salt Creek, stay away from the old cabin, and whatever you do, don't go down that ladder. You might not be as lucky as I was to get out alive. My name is Charles Thomas, and back in 2016 I found myself deep in the heart of the Black Hills National Forest in South Dakota. I was there to escape the noise of city life, thinking a week of solitude might do me some good. Funny how I thought trading honking horns for howling winds was a smart move. I had always been an outdoorsy type, or at least that's what my dating profile said. Truth be told, the closest I'd been to roughing it was a weekend at a lakeside cabin with Wi-Fi and a fully stocked fridge. But after a rough breakup and a particularly brutal week at work, I decided it was time to reconnect with nature, or at least give it a firm handshake. The first couple of days were uneventful. I hiked along well-marked trails, took pictures of anything that looked remotely scenic, and tried to convince myself that instant oatmeal was a suitable substitute for real food. I even attempted to start a campfire without using a lighter, which resulted in nothing but blisters and a newfound respect for modern technology. On the third day, I decided to venture a bit further off the beaten path. I stumbled upon an old trail that wasn't on any of the maps I had. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, overgrown with weeds and framed by towering pines that seemed to lean in just a bit too close. Adventure awaits, I muttered to myself, trying to sound enthusiastic. In hindsight, I should have turned back right then, but curiosity has a way of nudging you forward, much like how my mother nudges me about grandkids. As I walked, the forest grew denser. The sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an eerie silence. It was the kind of quiet that makes you check over your shoulder every few minutes. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my city nerves. "Get a grip, Nate," I whispered. "You're probably the scariest thing out here." Not my best pep talk, but it was all I had. About an hour in, I came across something strange, a clearing with a dilapidated cabin. It looked ancient, like it had been abandoned decades ago. The windows were shattered, the door hung off its hinges, and the wood was warped and rotten. For reasons I can't quite explain, I felt compelled to check it out. Maybe I was hoping to find some rustic charm, or at least a good story to tell at parties. As I approached, a foul smell hit me, something pungent, metallic, and unmistakably rotten. I covered my nose and hesitated. Probably just a dead animal, I thought, trying to convince myself. But as I peeked inside, I realized I was half right. The interior was a mess of broken furniture and scattered debris, but what caught my eye, or rather turned my stomach, were the remains of several animals scattered across the floor, bones picked clean, some still with bits of flesh clinging on. I stepped back, feeling a wave of nausea. "Well, that's enough National Geographic for one day," I mumbled, eager to put as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. I retraced my steps, but after a few minutes, I realized the path I had taken was nowhere to be found. Trees that looked familiar led to places that didn't. Panic started to set in. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun aimlessly. Perfect, lost in the woods with a faulty compass. Just my luck. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the shadows stretched longer and the temperature dropped. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that people get lost in the woods all the time and make it out just fine. Besides, I joked to no one. Bear Grylls made a career out of it. Maybe I'll get a TV deal out of this. I decided to keep moving, hoping to find a landmark or at the very least a cell signal. As darkness enveloped the forest, I heard something. A distant rustling followed by a low huffing sound. Probably just a deer, I told myself, or a raccoon, or any number of harmless woodland creatures that wouldn't mind sharing their GPS coordinates. But the sounds grew closer, more deliberate. Twigs snapped under heavy footsteps and leaves crunched with each movement. I picked up the pace, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. Suddenly a figure darted between the trees ahead, a large, hulking shape that moved with a natural speed. It was too big to be a deer and too swift to be a bear. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting it. Silence, then a guttural snarl, not like anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep, resonant, and sent a chill down my spine. I broke into a run, branches whipping against my face as I barreled through the underbrush. Behind me, the footsteps quickened. Whatever it was following me, and it was fast. I glanced back and caught a glimpse of it, a massive creature covered in matted fur, muscles rippling under its hide. It moved on all fours but had a gait that seemed almost wrong, like it could switch to two legs at any moment. Desperation kicked in. I veered off to the right, hoping to throw it off. Up ahead I saw a fallen tree bridging a shallow ravine. Without thinking, I dashed across it. Halfway over, the trunk started to wobble. I leaped to the other side just as the log gave way, crashing into the rocky stream below. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, but it was short-lived. The creature appeared on the opposite bank, its eyes locked onto me in the dim light. I could make out its features, a snout like a wolf but broader, with teeth that seemed too large for its mouth. Its eyes reflected the faint moonlight, giving them an eerie glow. "Not good, not good," I whispered, backing away slowly. It let out a roar, a sound so fierce it vibrated in my chest. I turned and ran again, my lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. I stumbled upon a narrow cave entrance, barely visible behind a curtain of ivy. Without options, I squeezed inside, pressing myself against the cold, damp stone. The cave was shallow, offering little protection, but it was all I had. The creature approached, sniffing the air. I could hear it prowling outside, its claws scraping against the rocks. It let out a series of huffs, and for a moment I thought it might move on. Then a massive arm reached into the cave, claws raking the space where my head had been moments before. I flattened myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. It couldn't reach me, but it wasn't giving up. The creature began clawing at the entrance, widening the gap inch by inch. Stones crumbled and dust filled the air. I frantically searched the cave for anything I could use. My hands closed around a hefty rock, and as its head started to push through the opening, I swung the rock with every ounce of strength I had. It connected with a sickening thud, and the creature recoiled, letting out a pained howl. Seizing the moment, I scrambled out of the cave, darting past the stunned beast. It swiped at me, catching the sleeve of my jacket and tearing it clean off. Adrenaline surged through me as I sprinted through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Up ahead, I saw lights flickering between the trees, a campsite bursting into the clearing. I startled a group of hikers gathered around a fire. "Help! There's something out there!" I shouted, my voice ragged. They looked at me, faces etched with confusion and concern. Before they could respond, the creature emerged from the shadows, standing at the edge of the clearing. The hikers gasped, and one of them fumbled for a flashlight, shining it directly at the beast. In the full light, it was even more terrifying, a towering figure with the muscular build of a predator and the wild eyes of a feral animal. Its fur was dark and matted, and its jaws were lined with sharp teeth, glistening with saliva. One of the hikers pulled out a flare gun. Why he had one, I didn't question. He fired it directly at the creature. The flare struck its shoulder, igniting its fur. The beast let out a deafening roar, thrashing wildly as flames spread across its body. "Move now," another hiker shouted. We didn't need to be told twice. The group scattered, running towards the vehicles parked nearby. I jumped into the back of a pickup truck just as the engine roared to life. We sped down a dirt road, the fiery glow fading behind us. Breathing heavily, I glanced back. The creature was nowhere in sight. The driver, a middle-aged man with a greying beard, looked at me through the rearview mirror. "What in God's name was that?" he asked. I shook my head, still trying to process everything. "I have no idea," I replied, "but I think we just ruined its evening." Another hiker chuckled nervously. "Well, remind me to leave a bad review for this campground. 0 stars for monstrous wildlife." We reached the nearest ranger station and reported the incident. They looked skeptical, but sent out a team to investigate. Hours later, they returned with grim expressions. They had found the burned remains of something they couldn't or wouldn't identify. Over the next few days, news spread about unexplained animal attacks in the area. Authorities chalked it up to a rogue bear, advising everyone to steer clear of the forest until they could ensure safety. I knew better. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't a bear and it wasn't alone. Reports came in of missing hikers, mauled bodies discovered by search parties, each incident more gruesome than the last. I left South Dakota, vowing to stick to city parks from then on. A swing set and a hot dog stand sounded a lot more appealing than anything the wilderness had to offer. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon an old newspaper article detailing local legends of shape-shifting creatures that roamed the Black Hills, a tale dismissed as folklore. But legends have to start somewhere, don't they? I was headed to Jefferson National Forest for a weekend getaway. I needed the break. Honestly, work had been hectic, and my girlfriend Lisa thought some time in nature might clear my head. So I packed up my RV and set off on what I thought would be a peaceful retreat. The first night, I parked the RV in a secluded spot by a small lake. It was perfect. No other campers around, just me and the sounds of the forest. I set up a small fire, cooked some beans and sausage, and cracked open a beer. The night was cool, the fire warm, and the stars brighter than I'd seen in a long time. I remember joking to myself about how cliché it was to be out here thinking about life and all that, but it felt good. After dinner, I decided to take a short walk before turning in. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods. I was about 10 minutes in when I noticed something odd. The usual forest sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, had stopped. It was dead silent. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but then a few minutes later, I found something strange. It was a small campsite, but it looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. There was a tent half collapsed with a sleeping bag spilling out of the entrance. Clothes were scattered around and a backpack lay open, its contents strewn across the ground. I called out, but no one answered. The whole scene gave me the creeps, so I decided to head back to my RV. As I turned to leave, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind the tent. I froze, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The rustling grew louder, and I backed away slowly. I didn't see anything, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I hurried back to the RV and locked the door behind me. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or a deer, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I tried to sleep, but every little noise outside had me on edge. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. The next day, I decided to stick closer to the RV. I spent the morning fishing at the lake and caught a couple of decent-sized trout. By noon, I was feeling more relaxed. The sun was shining, and the creepy campsite from the night before seemed like a distant memory. That afternoon, a couple of hikers passed by. They introduced themselves as Tom and Jake and said they were out exploring the trails for the weekend. We chatted for a bit, and I mentioned the abandoned campsite I'd found. They looked at each other, then back at me. "That's weird," Tom said. "We haven't seen anyone else out here." Jake nodded. "Maybe they left in a hurry or something. Could be anything." I agreed, but something in their expressions told me they were just as unsettled as I was. They moved on after a while, and I went back to my fishing. As evening fell, I started to feel that same unease from the night before. I decided to keep the fire going a bit longer tonight, just in case. I was sitting by the fire reading a book when I heard footsteps, human footsteps, not animal footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. I called out, thinking maybe it was Tom and Jake coming back, but no one answered. I stood up, the fire casting long shadows around me, and shone my flashlight into the darkness. I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, but it was too quick to make out. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice sounding braver than I felt. Still no answer. The footsteps stopped, and everything went silent again. I backed up to the RV, keeping the flashlight trained on the trees. I thought about grabbing the tire iron from the storage compartment, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the woods. Just as I was about to retreat inside, the footsteps started again, this time faster. I didn't wait. I jumped into the RV and locked the door, my heart pounding. I grabbed the tire iron and stood by the door, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside, and then there was a loud bang, like something heavy had hit the side of the RV. I don't know how long I stood there gripping the tire iron, but eventually the noises stopped. I spent the rest of the night sitting at the small table, staring at the door, tire iron in hand. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up with the first light of dawn streaming through the windows. The rest of the weekend was tense. I didn't stray far from the RV, always keeping one eye on the trees. I didn't see Tom and Jake again, and by the time Sunday rolled around, I was ready to get the hell out of there. On my way out, I decided to take a different route, hoping to avoid whatever had been stalking me. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't until I hit the main road that I finally started to relax. Back home, I told Lisa about the trip, but I left out the creepy parts. No point in worrying her, but the whole thing kept nagging at me. I did some research and found out that there had been a few disappearances in that area over the years, mostly hikers who wandered off and were never seen again. I couldn't stop thinking about the footsteps and the abandoned campsite. What had happened out there? Who or what had been watching me? I didn't have any answers, just a lingering sense of dread. A few weeks later, I got a call from the local sheriff. They'd found Tom and Jake's bodies not far from where I'd camped. They'd been mauled, but not by any animal the sheriff could identify. He asked if I had seen anything unusual, and I told him about the footsteps and the banging on the RV. He took notes, but I could tell he didn't really believe me. I've been camping plenty of times since then, but I never went back to Jefferson National Forest. There's something out there, something that doesn't want to be found, and if you're smart, you'll stay far away from it. A few months later, I got an email from a guy named Dave. He said he'd heard about my experience from the sheriff and wanted to meet. He claimed to be an expert on strange disappearances and thought he could help me figure out what happened. I was skeptical, but curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet him. Dave turned out to be a retired detective who'd spent years investigating missing persons cases. He'd come across patterns that didn't make sense, clusters of disappearances in remote areas. He showed me maps and reports, and it was clear he knew his stuff. He called the creature a name he said he'd found in old folklore, describing a malevolent forest spirit that lured people away. We talked for hours, and by the end, I wasn't sure what to believe. Part of me wanted to write it all off as superstition, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that there was something to his theories. I haven't seen Dave since that meeting, but his words stuck with me. I still go camping, but I'm more cautious now. I stick to well-traveled areas and always let someone know where I'm going. And every once in a while, when I'm out in the woods, I still hear those footsteps in my mind, slow and deliberate, reminding me that some mysteries are better left unsolved. As for Nix, I suppose it's just a name, a way to make sense of the unknown, but whatever it is, it's out there, lurking in the shadows of Jefferson National Forest, waiting for its next victim. My name's Stephen Gibson, and back in 2012, I took my RV up to the Uncompahgre National Forest in Colorado to get a bit of solitude. I figured a few days in the quiet woods was what I needed after a brutal stretch at my job. That and a chance to unwind and catch up on some reading I'd been putting off for too long. The campsite was perfect, a little slice of isolation in a pine grove near a mountain stream. There weren't any other campers around, just the way I liked it. After parking, I set up a small fire pit, rolled out a camp chair, and opened a cold beer. It wasn't until dusk that I noticed the first strange thing. Hanging from a tree just outside the edge of the camp was a bundle of what looked like animal bones tied together with rough twine. I remember squinting at it, trying to figure out if I was looking at some kind of decoration or a hunter's marker. I shrugged it off, figuring it was something left behind by previous campers, maybe someone with an odd sense of humor. But as night settled in, there was a strange tension in the air, a feeling like the forest was aware. That's the best way I can put it. And then there was a sound, a low, distant snap of a branch. Now, I'd done plenty of camping, so I knew the usual sounds. Animals rustling, branches falling, even the distant howl of a coyote or two. But this wasn't that. It felt deliberate, calculated, like someone was creeping around my campsite, observing me. I called out, maybe hoping it was another camper who just happened upon the spot. Silence. Not even the crickets joined in. Figuring it was probably my own nerves getting the best of me, I settled back in my chair, trying to brush it off. Maybe I even laughed a little, reminding myself I was out here to relax. But then, just as I was starting to unwind, another noise cut through the night. This time, it was closer, and it didn't sound natural. It was a low, whispering voice somewhere in the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but it had a strange rhythm, almost like a chant. I froze, listening harder, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. A chill crept up my spine, and I cursed myself for not bringing anything stronger than a pocket knife. There was a flash of movement. I turned my flashlight toward the trees and saw him, a man standing just outside the ring of light. He was gaunt, dressed in layers of old, tattered clothes that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in years. His face was twisted in a wild grin, eyes wide with something that looked too intense to be curiosity. I called out, asking him if he was lost, but he didn't answer. He just stared, that grin plastered on his face. I started getting that sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing I wasn't dealing with some lost hiker. This guy was here for a reason, and I had a strong feeling it had nothing to do with Friendly Campfire Company. Without a word, he stepped back into the darkness, vanishing from sight, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and that damn silence. I glanced around, debating if I should pack up and leave, but the road back was rough, and I wasn't eager to navigate it in the dark. So I went back into the RV, locking the door behind me, and grabbed a flashlight and a steak knife, the best I could manage at the time. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every rustle outside set me on edge. Hours seemed to pass with that quiet tension hanging thick in the air. Finally, sometime after midnight, I heard scratching at the door. Not loud, but enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. I held my breath, my hand gripping the flashlight tightly, ready to hit anything that came through. Then the door handle rattled. I don't remember deciding to open the door, but somehow I did, and there he was, standing right there on the other side, so close I could smell him. A rank mix of sweat and earth. His eyes darted around the inside of the RV before locking onto me. He didn't say anything, but that twisted grin returned. I forced out some words, telling him to leave and that I'd call the cops if he didn't back off. Still, he just stood there, staring. Then, in the most casual way you could imagine, he reached into his coat, pulling out a rusty hunting knife, the kind that looked like it had seen more than just a few animals. "Nice place you got here," he rasped, his voice as rough as gravel. I tried to shut the door, but he wedged his foot in, the grin widening. Panic started to claw at me. I shoved the door as hard as I could, finally managing to get it closed, hearing his foot crunch. His scream of pain echoed through the trees, and it was the most human sound I'd heard from him all night. I'd like to say I felt bad, but survival has a way of dulling empathy. It went quiet after that. I stood by the door, my heart pounding, flashlight in one hand and that ridiculous steak knife in the other, just waiting. A minute later I heard footsteps circling the RV, slow and deliberate, as if he was daring me to come out. Then I smelled smoke. I ran to the tiny window at the back and saw flames licking up the side of the RV, catching on the dry pine needles he'd piled against it. The guy had lit my RV on fire, probably thinking he could smoke me out like some kind of animal. And judging by the wild look in his eyes earlier, he wasn't doing this for kicks. This was personal. I grabbed a blanket, threw it over my shoulder, and kicked the emergency exit open, rolling out into the dirt. The flames were climbing, and as I scrambled to my feet, I saw him standing in the shadows, holding something in his hands. It was my backpack. Must have grabbed it while I was distracted. But it wasn't just the backpack he was holding. Hanging from his other hand was something that made my blood run cold. A severed hand, limp and dripping. The nails were caked with dirt, and I recognized the wristband on it. It was from a kid I'd seen camping with his family a few miles down the trail earlier that day. My mind reeled. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. The twisted satisfaction on his face as he held that hand was paralyzing. I don't know what kind of person it takes to do something like that, but I knew I didn't stand a chance if I tried to reason with him. He tossed the hand to the ground between us, as if he was offering me some kind of twisted trophy, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just about scaring me. This guy was a predator, someone who's done this before and planned to do it again. I backed up slowly, and he matched me, step for step, that knife glinting in his hand. I could feel my pulse hammering, knowing that if I made one wrong move, he'd close the gap in an instant. My options were narrowing by the second. Then I remembered the emergency flare in my pocket. I fumbled it out, not daring to take my eyes off him. With a quick flick, I sparked it to life, the bright red light flaring up between us, casting long shadows across his face. For the first time, he looked uncertain. It was just enough. I sprinted, hurling the flare, being the light and heat would buy me a few seconds. I tore down the trail, lungs burning, not daring to look back. Every sound felt amplified, every snap of a branch like a gunshot. I didn't stop running until I saw the lights of a ranger station up ahead. I stumbled in, gasping, barely able to get the words out. The rangers took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. They radioed for backup and checked the trail where I'd come from. By the time they got there, my RV was a charred skeleton and there was no sign of him. All they found was a pile of bones, some still smouldering, and a tattered piece of cloth with a name stitched into it. Later, they told me the guy had been living out in those woods for years, scavenging from campers, picking them off one by one. They called him the Hermit of Uncompahgre, a ghost story turned real. As for me, I've never been back, and I don't plan to. My name is Andrew Poole, and this happened to me in September 1993. I was never much of a camper, but I had just bought an old RV from my cousin and thought I'd take it out for a spin. I convinced my buddy, Reed Mayfield, to come along. Reed was the adventurous type, always down for a bit of fun. We planned a weekend trip to a remote spot near the Washington National Forest in Arkansas. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky. The campsite was perfect, right by a small creek, with enough flat ground to park the RV. We set up a fire, cracked open some beers, and spent the evening shooting the breeze. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet you don't get in the city, just the sounds of the creek and the occasional rustle of leaves. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. I remember Reed joking about how the place looked like the perfect setting for a horror movie. We laughed it off, not taking it seriously. We locked the RV door and went to bed. A few hours later, I woke up to a strange noise. It was a faint scratching, like something was brushing against the side of the RV. I figured it was just a branch or some animal, so I tried to ignore it. But then the scratching got louder, more insistent. I sat up, listening intently. Reed was still snoring, oblivious to the noise. "Reed, wake up," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He grumbled and rolled over, but didn't wake up. The scratching continued, now accompanied by a low thumping sound. My heart started pounding. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the window, trying to see what was making the noise. I peeked through the curtain, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. The flashlight beam flickered as I tried to steady my hand. That's when I saw it, a figure barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and hunched, its limbs long and twisted. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape moving slowly around the RV. "Reed, get up, man!" I said louder this time. He finally woke up, blinking groggily. "What's going on?" "Something's outside," I said, my voice shaking. Reed sat up and grabbed his own flashlight. We both stared at the window, waiting. The noises stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence. Reed and I exchanged worried glances. "I think we should check it out," he said. "You're crazy," I replied. What if it's some kind of animal? Then we scare it off, he said, already pulling on his boots. I hesitated, but eventually did the same. We grabbed the only weapons we had, a couple of kitchen knives, and cautiously opened the RV door. The night air was cool and still, the only sound our breathing and the distant murmur of the creek. We stepped outside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The ground around the RV was undisturbed, no signs of anything unusual. Reed moved ahead, scanning the area with his flashlight. I stayed close behind, my grip tight on the knife. See anything? I whispered. Nothing, he replied, his voice tense. We circled the RV, finding nothing out of place. Just as we were about to head back inside, we heard a rustling noise coming from the trees. Our flashlights snapped in that direction, but we saw nothing. Maybe it was just an animal, Reed said, though he didn't sound convinced. Yeah, maybe, I muttered, still uneasy. We went back inside, locking the door behind us. Reed fell asleep almost immediately, but I lay awake, listening for any more strange noises. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. The next morning, the sun was shining, and everything seemed normal. We laughed off the previous night's scare, convincing ourselves it was just our imagination. We spent the day hiking and exploring the area, trying to enjoy our trip. That evening, we made a fire and cooked some dinner. As we sat around the fire, Reed brought up the noises again. You think it could have been someone messing with us? He asked. I don't know, I said, but if it was, they're probably long gone by now. We tried to put it out of our minds and enjoy the rest of the night. But as the sun set, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. After dinner, we cleaned up and headed inside the RV. We double-checked the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I kept my knife close, just in case. Around midnight, the noises started again. This time, it was louder and more deliberate. It sounded like something was trying to get in. Reed and I were wide awake, fear gripping us. We listened as the scratching and thumping grew more intense. We need to get out of here, Reed said, his voice trembling. I nodded, grabbing the keys and our flashlights. We cautiously opened the door and stepped outside. The noise stopped immediately, the night falling silent once again. We made our way to the driver's side, but as I reached for the door handle, something grabbed my arm. I screamed, jerking my arm away. The flashlight beam swung wildly, illuminating a grotesque face inches from mine. Its skin was pale and leathery, eyes sunken and lifeless. It let out a guttural hiss, bearing jagged teeth. Reed swung his flashlight, hitting the creature in the face. It recoiled, giving us a moment to scramble into the RV. I slammed the door shut and fumbled with the keys, starting the engine. Go, go, go! Reed yelled, looking back at the creature through the window. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward. The creature chased after us, its twisted limbs moving with unnatural speed. We sped down the dirt road, the RV bouncing over the uneven ground. The creature kept pace for a while before finally fading into the darkness. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached a small town. We found a gas station and parked, too shaken to continue. We sat in silence, trying to process what had just happened. What the hell was that? Reed finally asked. I don't know, I said, my hand still shaking, but I never want to see it again. We decided to head home the next day, cutting our trip short. As we drove back, we tried to make sense of what we had seen. We debated whether to tell anyone, fearing they wouldn't believe us. In the end, we decided to keep it to ourselves. Years later, I still think about that night. Reed and I drifted apart, but we never spoke of it again. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the scratching sound and feel a chill run down my spine. I don't know what that creature was, but I have a name for it now. It's just a name I made up, but it feels right. A name for the thing that haunts my nightmares. I've never been camping since. I've always loved the idea of camping, being out in nature and away from the noise of the city. This one trip, though, it sticks with me in a way I can't shake. It was just me and my old college buddy, Levi Hornsby. Levi had just gone through a rough divorce and needed a break from everything. We decided to take his RV out to a spot in Oregon near the Umpqua National Forest. Not a well-known camping spot, but it had the seclusion we were looking for. Levi and I met in college. We weren't exactly the studious types, more the kind who'd head out for a beer after class and talk about our next big adventure. Levi's about 6'2", with broad shoulders and a laugh that could fill a room. After the divorce, though, he was quieter, more introspective. I thought this trip might bring back the old Levi. We arrived late in the afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the dense trees. We set up camp quickly, Levi handling the RV hookups while I got a fire going. We were both eager to crack open a few beers and catch up. It was around the fire that Levi told me more about his ex, Kim. "She's got the kids this week," he said, staring into the flames. "I miss them, but I needed this, you know? Just some time away." I nodded. "Yeah, man, sometimes you just need to hit reset." The first night was peaceful, just the sounds of the forest and the crackling fire. We talked about everything and nothing until the fire died down and we turned in. The next day we decided to do some hiking. We packed some sandwiches and water bottles and set off down one of the less traveled trails. The forest was dense, the air cool and fresh. It felt good to stretch our legs and breathe in something other than exhaust fumes. As we walked, we fell into an easy silence, the kind that only old friends can share. We didn't need to fill the space with words. The quiet was nice, until it wasn't. We found a clearing about 2 miles in. It was a nice spot to stop and eat our lunch. We were sitting on a couple of rocks just finishing up when Levi frowned. "You hear that?" he asked. I listened, but didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. "Hear what, exactly?" "No birds, no wind. It's like the whole forest just went silent." It was strange. I hadn't noticed until he pointed it out, but he was right. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. We packed up quickly and started back toward camp. It was probably nothing, but it was eerie all the same. That night, as we sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Levi was quieter than usual, too. We called it an early night, hoping to shake the weird vibe by morning. I woke up around midnight to a noise outside the RV. It sounded like something scratching, a soft, persistent sound. I sat up and listened, but it stopped. Figuring it was just a raccoon or something, I lay back down. I was almost asleep again when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, right outside the RV. I sat up again and looked over at Levi. He was still asleep, snoring softly. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly crept to the window. I couldn't see anything out there, but the footsteps continued, circling the RV. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to wake Levi over what was probably nothing. Still, I kept the flashlight by my side and listened until the footsteps faded into the distance. The next morning, I told Levi about the footsteps. He laughed it off, saying it was probably just an animal. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't press it. We decided to take it easy that day, stick around the camp and maybe go fishing. Around noon, a couple of hikers wandered into our campsite. They looked like they'd been out there for a while, dirty and tired. They introduced themselves as Ben and Rachel, said they'd gotten lost, and asked if they could use our map. We handed it over and chatted for a bit. They seemed nice enough, just a bit shaken from their ordeal. Levi and I showed them the right path on the map, and they thanked us before heading off. As they left, Ben turned and said, "Be careful out here. We heard some weird noises last night. Thought it was an animal at first, but I don't know. Just be careful." That didn't sit well with me. I kept thinking about those footsteps. Levi brushed it off, though. "Don't worry about it. We're out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, there's going to be weird noises." I tried to let it go, but that night the footsteps came back. This time Levi heard them too. We both sat up, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving around the RV. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped outside. The night was pitch black, the fire reduced to embers. We shone our lights around but saw nothing. "Hello?" Levi called out. No answer. We stood there for a long moment, flashlights scanning the darkness, but the footsteps stopped. We went back inside, but neither of us slept much after that. The next day, we decided to cut the trip short. Something wasn't right, and it was better to be safe than sorry. We started packing up the RV, planning to head out after breakfast. As we were loading up, we heard a scream. It was far off, but it was definitely a scream. We grabbed our gear and ran toward the sound. It didn't take long to find the source. Ben was lying on the ground, his face pale and bloodied. Rachel was nowhere to be seen. "Help," he gasped. It took her. It took Rachel. Levi and I tried to ask him what happened, but he was in shock, barely able to speak. We did what we could to help him, then called for an ambulance. While we waited, he managed to tell us bits and pieces. "We were walking," he said, his voice trembling. "Something came out of the trees. It looked like an animal, but not. It grabbed Rachel and dragged her off." I looked at Levi. His face was as white as Ben's. This wasn't just a weird noise or footsteps. This was something else. Something dangerous. The paramedics arrived and took Ben away. We told them what he had said, and they said they'd send a search party for Rachel. Levi and I finished packing up the RV in silence. We didn't need to say it. We both knew it was time to go. We hit the road, the RV bumping along the dirt path. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Levi broke the silence. "What do you think it was?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but it's not something I want to stick around and find out." We drove in silence for a while, the forest thinning out as we got closer to the highway. Just as we were about to breathe a sigh of relief, we saw something in the road, a figure standing still, watching us. Levi slowed the RV, and we both peered out the windshield. The figure was tall, its limbs too long, its eyes reflecting the headlights in a way that no animal's eyes should. It stood there for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the trees. We didn't speak until we hit the highway, of the lights of other cars finally making us feel a little safer. We didn't stop until we reached a town, and even then, we didn't talk about what we'd seen. We just wanted to get home. It's been a few months since that trip. Levi is back to his old self, mostly. He's been seeing his kids more, trying to move on from the divorce. We haven't talked much about what happened out there, but we don't need to. We both know it's something we'll never forget. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps. I'll be lying in bed, trying to sleep, and I'll hear them, slow and deliberate, moving around the house. I tell myself it's just my imagination, that it's nothing. But deep down, I know there's something out there, something that doesn't belong. The authorities never found Rachel. Ben hasn't been the same since. He moved away, last I heard, trying to put as much distance between himself and those woods as possible. Can't say I blame him. Levi and I made a pact not to go camping again. Once was enough. I still think about that thing we saw, those long limbs and reflective eyes. Sometimes I wonder what it was, where it came from, and why it chose us. Other times I try not to think about it at all. But every now and then, when I'm alone and the night is quiet, I remember those footsteps. And I know that somewhere out there, it's still watching. We gave it a name, Levi and I, something to make it feel a little less real. We called it Glimmer. It sounds harmless, almost silly, but we both know better. We know that Glimmer is out there, waiting, watching, biding its time. And that's the scariest part. My name is Edward John, and what I'm about to tell you happened back in 2009. I was a Navy SEAL stationed in the Pacific Northwest on a covert mission. Our base was tucked away in the dense forests of Washington state, far from any prying eyes. We were on a routine reconnaissance operation, scouting potential threats and securing the area for an upcoming training exercise. I remember that day vividly. The sky was overcast, the kind that presses down on you and makes everything feel a bit too close. We were a small team, just 5 of us. Me, CPL Brian Cosner, Sergeant Ellie Bear, Lieutenant Mark Vass, and our medic, Petty Officer Lisa Drayton. We were a tight-knit group, having seen action together in some of the world's most volatile hotspots. We set out early, moving through the forest with practiced ease. The trees were thick, their branches knitting together to block out the sun. The underbrush was a tangle of ferns and fallen logs, making our progress slow but steady. The radio chatter was minimal, just enough to keep us coordinated without drawing unnecessary attention. It wasn't long before things started to feel off. Ellie was the first to mention it. "Dirk, you getting any strange readings on your GPS?" she asked, her voice crackling through the headset. I checked my device and frowned. The signal was jumping all over the place, the usual precision lost in a jumble of numbers. "Yeah, mine's acting up too," I replied. "Could be interference. Let's keep moving, but stay sharp." We pressed on, but the feeling of unease only grew. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of birds and small animals, was eerily silent. It felt like we were being watched, but every time I scanned the trees, I saw nothing. "Hold up," Brian said, raising his hand. "You hear that?" We all stopped and listened. There was a faint rustling, like something moving through the underbrush. It was too controlled to be an animal, but too quiet for a person. "Maybe just the wind," Lisa suggested, though her eyes told a different story. We were all on edge, senses heightened as we continued our patrol. About an hour later, we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. In a small clearing, we found what remained of a campsite. Tents were torn apart, supplies scattered, and a fire pit filled with ashes. But what caught our attention were the tracks. Large humanoid footprints pressed deep into the soft earth, each print showing a strange, elongated shape with claw-like impressions. "What the hell made those?" Mark muttered, crouching down to examine them. "Those aren't bear tracks, that's for sure." We took pictures, documented everything, and decided to head back to base. Whatever was out here, we weren't equipped to handle it without more information. As we made our way back, the feeling of being watched intensified. The forest seemed to close in around us, each shadow a potential threat. Suddenly, Ellie, who was leading, stopped dead in her tracks. "Dirk, look at this," she whispered, pointing ahead. I moved up beside her and saw what she meant. Just ahead, partially hidden by the foliage, was a body. It was one of the missing campers, a young man by the looks of it. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide open, and his throat slashed. We secured the area and called it in, keeping our weapons ready as we waited for extraction. The forest seemed to come alive with movement. Shadows flickered at the edge of our vision, and the rustling grew louder. "Eyes on the perimeter," I ordered. "Stay alert." Minutes felt like hours, but finally we heard the chop of helicopter blades. We moved to the extraction point, carrying the body with us. As we reached the clearing, something barreled out of the trees, hitting Brian hard. He went down with a grunt, and before we could react, a creature was on him. It was humanoid but twisted, with pale, almost translucent skin and long limbs that ended in sharp claws. "Fire!" I shouted, raising my rifle. We opened fire, bullets tearing into the creature, but it moved with unnatural speed. It slashed at Brian again before retreating into the forest. "Brian, hang on!" Lisa shouted, rushing to his side. Blood poured from deep gashes in his chest, and his breathing was shallow. We formed a defensive circle, weapons trained on the trees as Lisa worked to stabilize him. "Got to get him out of here now!" she yelled. The helicopter touched down, and we moved as quickly as we could, dragging Brian onto the chopper. As we lifted off, I caught a glimpse of the creature watching us from the tree line, its dark eyes following our ascent. Back at base, Brian was rushed to the infirmary. Despite Lisa's best efforts, he didn't make it. The loss hit us hard, but there was no time to grieve. Command needed answers, and we had to figure out what we were dealing with. The next few days were a blur of briefings and planning sessions. We pored over the data, trying to make sense of what we'd encountered. There were no matches in any known databases, no records of similar creatures. It was as if it didn't exist. A ghost in the wilderness, determined to avenge Brian and protect any other potential victims. we prepared for another mission. This time, we were going in heavily armed and with reinforcements. We set out at dawn, moving back to the area where we'd found the campsite. We spread out in a grid pattern, sweeping the forest for any signs of the creature. Hours passed with no contact, just the oppressive silence and the constant feeling of being watched. As night fell, we set up camp, keeping a tight perimeter and rotating watches. It was during Lisa's watch that the creature struck again. A piercing scream cut through the night, waking us all. We scrambled out of our tents, weapons at the ready. Lisa was gone, her gear scattered around her post. We followed the sound of rustling leaves and snapping branches. The creature's path was easy to track. We found her a few hundred yards away, her body broken and bloodied. The creature was still there, looming over her with primal intensity. We opened fire, and this time it didn't retreat. It charged, moving with terrifying speed and agility. We fought hard, but it was like trying to stop a hurricane with a garden hose. Ellie was the next to fall, her screams echoing through the forest as the creature tore into her. Mark and I managed to get a few hits in, but it was relentless. Desperate, we used everything we had. Grenades, knives, bare fists. In the end, it was Mark who managed to land the killing blow, a lucky shot that hit the creature square in the head. It collapsed, twitching and bleeding out onto the forest floor. We stood there, breathing hard, covered in blood and sweat. The thing that had terrorized us was finally dead, but the cost was too high. We lost good people, friends, and that cursed forest. We radioed for extraction and waited in grim silence. When the chopper arrived, we loaded up our fallen comrades and the creature's body. Back at base, we handed it over to the scientists and debriefed command. The creature was an anomaly, something beyond our understanding. They called it a genetic mutation, a freak of nature, but I wasn't convinced. There was something too deliberate about its actions, too intelligent. In the aftermath, we were given time to recover, but the events of that mission never left us. The forest was off limits, quarantined by the government, and the official story was a tragic training accident. But we knew the truth, or at least part of it. I left the SEALs a year later, the memories of that mission haunting my dreams. I still think about Brian, Lisa, and Ellie, their faces frozen in my mind. And sometimes late at night I can still hear the rustling in the trees, a reminder of the thing we fought and the price we paid. Life goes on, but that part of the forest remains a dark spot on the map, a place where the lines between man and monster blur. And though I've tried to move past it, I know I'll never forget. The past is always there, lurking just out of sight, waiting to remind us of what we've lost. My name is Jacob Gonzalez, and this happened to me on July 20th, 2024. I remember that day clearly because it was the day I thought a quiet camping trip could help me clear my head after my divorce. I packed up my old RV and headed to the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful, dense forest, perfect for getting away from everything. I'd been there a few times before, but always with friends or family. This time I needed some solitude. I arrived mid-afternoon, parked the RV in a secluded spot, and set up a small campfire. I roasted a few hot dogs and sipped on a beer, letting the tranquility of the forest wash over me. The first night was uneventful, just the usual sounds of wildlife and the gentle rustling of leaves. I felt the kind of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The second day I decided to go for a hike. The weather was perfect. Sunny, but not too hot. I followed a trail that led deeper into the forest, enjoying the sound of birds and the sight of deer grazing in the distance. I had my backpack with some essentials: water, a snack, a map, and my pocket knife. I wasn't planning on being gone long. A couple of hours into my hike, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was caved in on one side, and vines had started to reclaim it. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to take a closer look inside. It was as you'd expect, dusty, with broken furniture and scattered debris. There was something strange about the place, though. On one of the walls there were markings that looked like they'd been scratched in with something sharp. They didn't make any sense to me, just random lines and symbols. I didn't stay long in the cabin. There was something unsettling about it, so I headed back to my RV. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. I made it back just as darkness fell. That night things started to feel different. The usual forest sounds were there, but they seemed distant, almost muted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I chalked it up to my imagination and turned in early. The next morning I found something out near my campsite. Footprints. Large but not quite human. They were more like impressions in the dirt, spaced too far apart for a person, but not resembling any animal tracks I'd ever seen. I took a few pictures with my phone, figuring I'd look them up later. I told myself it was probably a bear or something, though it didn't make much sense. Bears don't usually come that close to a campsite, and these prints were different. That evening I started hearing noises, not the usual animal sounds, but something else. A kind of shuffling followed by what sounded like low whispers. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my campfire and my dinner. But as the night went on, the noises grew louder and more persistent. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to check it out, convinced it was just my nerves getting the best of me. I circled the campsite, shining the beam of light into the darkness. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. I was about to head back to the fire when I saw something move. It was quick, darting between the trees. My heart started pounding as I swung the flashlight in the direction of the movement. For a split second, I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, with pale, almost translucent skin. Then it was gone. I stumbled back to my RV, locking the door behind me. I sat there, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my mind playing tricks on me. I didn't sleep much that night, every little sound setting me on edge. The following morning, I found more footprints around my campsite. This time they were closer and more defined. I decided it was time to leave. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to stick around and find out. I packed up my things quickly, ready to get the hell out of there. As I was loading up the last of my gear, I heard it again. The shuffling and whispering. This time it was closer, almost right behind me. I turned and there it was, standing at the edge of the trees. Its eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to bore into me. I froze, my mind racing. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. I fumbled for my pocket knife, the only thing I had for protection. The figure moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. I backed up slowly, trying to get to the RV without turning my back on it. It reached out long fingers, stretching toward me. In a panic, I threw the knife. It wasn't a well-aimed throw, more of a desperate attempt to buy myself a few seconds. The creature stopped, looking down at the knife lodged in its arm. It let out a sound, a mix between a hiss and a wheeze, before pulling the knife out and dropping it to the ground. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I jumped into the RV, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was standing there, watching me leave. That image is burned into my mind, its eyes, dark and empty, following me as I sped down the dirt road. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I found a small diner and went inside, probably looking like a madman. I asked the waitress if there had been any strange sightings or stories about the forest. She gave me a puzzled look and shook her head. I showed her the pictures of the footprints. She frowned, saying she'd never seen anything like that before. I didn't press it any further. I just wanted to get back home, to put as much distance between me and whatever that thing was. It's been almost a year now, and I haven't been back to the forest. I've tried to look up information about what I saw, but there's nothing that quite matches it. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in my head, but then I remember those footprints, the knife, and those eyes. I talked to a few people about it, but most just think I was overtired or stressed from the divorce. Maybe they're right, but deep down, I know what I saw. I don't think I'll ever go camping alone again, and if you ever find yourself in the Allegheny National Forest, keep an eye out. You never know what might be watching you. I've thought a lot about what to call it, this thing that I encountered. The only word that comes to mind is Nix. It sounds like something from folklore, fitting for a creature that seemed to come out of the night itself. So if you're ever in that part of Pennsylvania and hear something moving in the trees, remember Nix. And maybe, just maybe, stay a little closer to civilization. My name is George Lopez, and back in 2017, I had an unforgettable experience near Crater Lake in Oregon. I've always been an outdoor enthusiast, though my friends say I'm just a glutton for mosquito bites and bad coffee brewed over campfires. I decided to take a solo hiking trip to clear my head after a rough breakup. Nothing like Mother Nature to heal a bruised ego, right? I packed my gear, double-checked my map, and set off on a trail that was supposedly less traveled, figuring I'd avoid both the crowds and the selfie sticks. The morning was perfect. The sky was a shade of blue that Crayola would kill to patent, and the air was so crisp it felt like biting into a fresh apple. As I made my way deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded until all I could hear was the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional chirp of birds, probably complaining about my intrusion. About 2 hours in, I came across an old man sitting on a fallen log. He wore a flannel shirt and had a beard that would make Santa Claus jealous. "Morning," I said, tipping my hat. He looked up with piercing eyes. "You heading up the trail alone?" "Yep, just me, myself and I replied with a grin. He shook his head slowly. "Be careful out there. Folks have been going missing. Appreciate the concern, but I've got a map and a compass. What's the worst that could happen?" I chuckled. He didn't laugh. "Just watch yourself," he muttered before turning back to whittle a piece of wood. I shrugged it off. There's always one local trying to spook the tourists. Probably gets his kicks that way. I continued along the path, humming a tune that had been stuck in my head since I left the city. A while later, I noticed the forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. "Well, that's not ominous at all," I mumbled. I pressed on, convincing myself that nature takes coffee breaks too. Then I spotted something that made me stop cold, a backpack, lying torn beside the trail. It looked like it had been shredded by something with claws. "Great, just great," I sighed. "Either there's a bear with anger issues, or someone's auditioning for a horror movie." I picked up the pace, keeping my eyes peeled. The trees seemed taller now, their branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly a foul stench hit me like rotten meat left out in the sun. I gagged. "Man, did something crawl up here and die?" I followed the smell against my better judgment and stumbled upon a gruesome scene, a deer carcass, mutilated beyond recognition. "Okay, time to head back," I decided aloud. I turned around only to hear a rustling behind me. I spun around but saw nothing. "Get it together, Silas," I whispered. "You're scaring yourself." I started backtracking when I heard it again, heavy footsteps matching my own. I stopped, the footsteps stopped. I took a few quick steps, the echo followed. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer. "If this is a joke, it's not funny." Silence. I gripped my pocket knife, not that it would do much good, and walked faster. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. Something large darted between the trees. I broke into a run, so did it. Branches whipped my face as I sprinted down the trail. I could hear it gaining on me, breathing heavily. In a panic, I veered off the path, hoping to lose it in the dense underbrush. Bad idea. I stumbled into a clearing and froze. Scattered around were pieces of clothing, a broken watch, and most horrifyingly, a human arm, partially buried under leaves. "Jesus Christ!" I gasped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. A low snarl came from behind me. I turned slowly to face whatever had been chasing me. It stood on the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadows. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall on its hind legs, with a body covered in thick, matted fur. Its face resembled a wolf, but more elongated, and its eyes glinted with a predatory intelligence. Claws like daggers extended from its hands. Yes, hands, not paws. "Well, this isn't in any of the guidebooks," I muttered, backing away slowly. It bared its teeth, each one as sharp as a razor. I glanced around for anything to defend myself. My eyes landed on a rusty shovel among the scattered items. "Guess beggars can't be choosers," I said, diving for it. Just as the creature lunged, I swung the shovel wildly, catching it across the snout. It yelped, more in annoyance than pain. "Figures," I groaned. "My ex hit harder than that." I dodged as it swiped at me, the claws slicing through the air inches from my face. "Ever heard of personal space?" I shouted. Using the shovel like a pole vault, I thrust myself backward and took off running again. Behind me, the creature let out a howl that echoed through the forest. I crashed through the trees until I burst onto another trail, nearly bowling over a group of hikers. "Watch it!" one of them yelled. "Turn around! We have to go!" I shouted. "What's your problem, man?" another asked. "There's something out here. It just tried to make me its lunch." They looked at me skeptically, but then the creature's howl filled the air once more. "What the hell was that?" a woman in the group whispered, her eyes wide. "No time to explain. Move!" Panic spread across their faces, and we all started running together. "This way." One of them pointed toward a sign indicating a ranger station half a mile ahead. "Great! Maybe they have a giant can of bug spray." I quipped between gasps as we ran. One of the hikers, a guy named Marcus, stumbled and fell. I hesitated for a split second before turning back to help him up. "Come on, buddy, no time for naps." "Thanks," he panted as we caught up with the others. We reached the ranger station, a small wooden building that looked sturdier than anything else around. We piled inside, slamming the door behind us. "What's going on?" demanded the ranger on duty, a burly man with a mustache that could rival a walrus. "There's some kind of animal out there. It's huge, and it's attacking people," I blurted out. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure you folks aren't just seeing things?" "Do I look like I'm in the mood for jokes?" I snapped. As if on cue, a heavy thud hit the side of the building. Everyone went silent. "What in creation?" the ranger muttered. He grabbed his rifle and moved toward the window, peering outside. His face went pale. "What the hell is that?" "Believe me now?" I whispered. The creature slammed against the door, cracking the wood. "Is this place up to code?" I asked. "There's a basement," the ranger said. "Go now." We didn't need to be told twice. We rushed down the stairs, the sound of splintering wood following us. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old equipment and boxes. "Any other exits?" I asked. "Just the one upstairs," the ranger replied grimly. "Fantastic! We're sitting ducks." The creature tore through the door above, its footsteps heavy on the floorboards. "Why is it after us?" the woman, whose name I learned was Na, whispered. "Maybe it didn't like my joke about the bug spray," I said. "Really? Now's the time for jokes?" Marcus hissed. "Hey, laughter is the best medicine, though in this case I think we're going to need something stronger." The creature began tearing up the place, snarling as it searched for us. The ranger loaded his rifle. "When it comes down those stairs, I'll shoot. The rest of you, look for anything to defend yourselves." I rummaged through the boxes and found a flare gun. "Better than nothing," I shrugged. Nina grabbed a heavy wrench, and Marcus armed himself with a rusty machete that looked like it had seen better days. The creature started down the stairs, its massive form barely fitting in the stairwell. The ranger took aim. "Hold! Hold!" As soon as it was in sight, he fired. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, but it only seemed to make it angrier. "Well, that's just great," I muttered. "Got any silver bullets lying around?" "Funny guy," the ranger grumbled. I fired the flare gun. The flare hit the creature square in the chest, igniting its fur. It roared in pain, thrashing wildly. "Time to go," I shouted. We darted past it while it was distracted, racing up the stairs and out of the ruined station. Behind us, the creature was struggling to extinguish the flames. "Head for the vehicles," the ranger yelled. We sprinted across the clearing to the parked cars. I fumbled with the keys to my rental, my hands shaking. "Open it! Open it!" "Nah," urged. We piled in, and I started the engine just as the creature emerged from the station, still smouldering but very much alive. "Hang on!" I yelled, flooring the gas pedal. We sped down the dirt road, the creature disappearing in the rearview mirror. "Everyone okay?" I asked. "Define okay," Marcus said, clutching his chest. "What was that thing?" "Nah," whispered. "I don't know," I replied, "and I don't plan on finding out." We reached the main road and headed straight to the nearest town. At the sheriff's office, we tried to explain what had happened. They looked at us like we were crazy, but agreed to send a patrol to the park. Days later, news reports surfaced about several missing hikers and a wild animal sighting. The park was closed indefinitely, and authorities claimed to be investigating. But I couldn't let it go. I started digging into local legends, old newspaper archives, anything that might explain what we saw. I stumbled upon stories of a creature, a guardian of the forest, created by indigenous tribes centuries ago to protect the land from those who would harm it. According to the legends, it targeted anyone who disrespected the natural order. Maybe we had unknowingly trespassed into sacred territory, or perhaps the old man on the trail had tried to warn me. In the end, I realized that some paths are better left untraveled, and some secrets of the wild are kept for a reason.